Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and finally we get into possibly the beginning of the end for these Chris and articles as we go into the section of Chris and technology, and I couldn't start this entire section off without first playing this.
So is it any wonder people are afraid of technology?
Technology!
Okay, I had my fun, but that's like... There are some things in life, ladies and gentlemen, that's like an extraordinarily uncanny attempt at comedy, and that was certainly one of them. So, let us begin. Chris and cameras. Question: why do so many of your videos have a greenish-yellow tinge? Answer: it's one of the flaws in recording with Sony's iCreate program, a downloadable PlayStation free application that requires the PlayStation Eye camera. They need to fix the program, not only of that tint from lack of some light, but the audio-video skips that seems to occur during recording. Chris believing it's all in the equipment, like, you know, a bad workman will always blame his tools and all that. Meanwhile, oh, and the windows at the place were tinted, so the photography would be at best from the inside the place. Chris trying to troll us as Jenkins Jinkies, like we wouldn't know what tinted windows actually do to your photographs. So, here we go. Actually, I must. I've got to have the bigger one on. There we go. Cameras are one of the most ubiquitous and defining inventions of the 19th century, also the 1800s. Through today, allowing folks around the world to document their lives and create art without ever touching a brush. One of those folks is Chris, who has been on both sides of the camera from an early age. Chris's approach to camera work is all kinds of abysmal. Yeah, so, well, along with everything else. Whether we're talking about still photography or video work, and by the way, in case for those at all interested as well, is that coming up to 10 years ago is when I started doing my A-levels in photography, and I myself have nearly 6 years worth of experience in broadcasting, aka actually getting my head around a camera and the importance that is lights. Now, the reason why it looks a little bit different here is that it's only 20 past 2 in the afternoon, and when I usually do record at light, I would have like my 2 lights on at both corners of my desk, including the light above, and I would take the mirror down as well, because I don't want to like create a reflection of just a bright white light. But that's just one side of procedures. Despite years of constant and obviously euphemistic photography and homemaking, video making, Chris hasn't learned anything beyond the basics of this craft. In fact, the way he still routinely fucks up things proves that he is handling cameras far worse than your average Joe with an iPhone. And as we've seen from what Chris has done to this camera, bad camera handling can be interpreted in more than one way. Oh, and by the way, for as much as he sucks at positioning photos, at least Chris is really good at hiding his failures. Well, almost not nearly enough, because you can even see the reflection of the tint of the Sony PlayStation camera, and that his background even still looks like a mess, to be honest. I believe this is what the French would call to consider the mise en scène, and, well, He's not going to win an Oscar anytime soon for that. Certainly not in videography. Chris's video production efforts have been hindered by the fact that despite years of practice, he still doesn't know anything about cinematography. He's oblivious to several bits of common sense, like, if you want to see anything at all, light the scene properly. Chris goes as far as to never even check his videos before uploading them, nor does he check his recording equipment before filming. I will admit that I've fallen into this trap several times before, but again, that's why we double check things, or why we rely sometimes on people to comment about if there have been issues with cinematography, and that's why we take these things on board and help each other out in these times of need. Note that not every failure in Chris's cinematography can be attributed solely to Chris. It's obvious that in some cases where he's in front of the camera, he has gotten help that goes beyond merely using a camera timer or doing heavy-handed editing. Yet he still fancies, I should say, that he's in creative control, which proves that he just doesn't see any mistakes in his pet projects, no matter how obvious. If you end up as great director Chandler's cameraman, he won't complain about your lack of talent, nor compliment you if you outdo him, unless you fail to draw Rosechu's tail correctly. Or something. Chris's cameras. Chris's camera equipment has been fairly mediocre over the years, even by home video standards. His first known camera was a Tyco video camera. It filmed black and white VHS footage, and it was not a camcorder. You needed to plug it into a VCR. Chris used this camera for The Song of Christian, his earliest known self-recorded video, and yes, indeed, we can actually take a short look of that, and this is essentially the very first. It was a poem that Chris did, which was haphazardly based on Walt Whitman's Song of Myself. And yeah, this comes as far back as like 1998. So, just take a look at this if you've never seen this before. And this is like Chris's first actual attempt at putting this up.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Christian Chandler Show. Where you get lots of laughs and all that neat old stuff. And now here he is, the host with the most, Christian Chandler. Good evening, friends, and welcome to the Christian Chandler Show. I am your host, Christian Chandler. Now tonight we are going to talk about poetry and the behind the scenes of the lines, which got me inspired.
I think, to be honest, the first things to note when it comes to this sort of thing is the fact that I can't necessarily give Chris low marks because this was his first attempt, and you're never ever going to get anything right on the first try. But what I will dock Chris points for is the fact that actually some of his earliest examples have actually outdone quite a lot of his later work through presentation, and you could even say if Chris had kept this up, or something that actually is a bit something you don't see is the idea that why don't more YouTubers do something in the style of an extremely limited or used older equipment, and try to make something a throwback to something this is only perception in any case, and you never know, I might be giving myself ideas for these sorts of things, so I can't really blame, because that was all the way back in 26 years ago, so you can't really blame Chris that much for how those things turned out. He was still too young and still incredibly naive about the world, but there it is. His earliest known self-recorded video, the low-quality footage, even for its time, shows as half of Chris's face is black throughout the clip. Chris's primary camera for the classic era was his PlayStation Eye. That camera has seen enough abuse to start randomly stuttering and lose connection mid-video, because Chris decided that the best way to exert his anger is to damage his own equipment for some reason. I don't really understand if Chris ever thought the logic of what he was doing was just... That's why you invest in things like a speed bag or a heavy bag, something you could actually take your frustrations out on, not on, things you've paid for. That camera... Okay, so then, of course, Chris took better care of its successor, the PlayStation 4 camera, though he didn't know how to turn off the default background music while recording for some time, even when people blatantly told him how to do this. Also, Chris could have just looked this up, but your guess is as good as mine. He was too busy spending it more on Legos and an anime body pillow, while crying that the mortgage was due tomorrow. Chris has been an early adapter of mobile device cameras. He has owned a Game Boy camera and a Nintendo DSi, the latter of which was used to shoot photos of Michael Snyder in the gameplays, but more on that later. Chris also owns 2 iPhones and regularly uses them for pictures and videos. These are perhaps his highest quality cameras, offering 12 megapixel resolutions. Chris borrowed a proper film SLR camera for A Week with Christian Weston Chandler, proving the poor equipment is far from his only photographic failure. framing the shots. Of course, what the French would typically refer to as the mise en scène, and it was literally one of the very first things I ever learned when I was studying like film at university. And well, you're about to see that Chris wouldn't even show up to like day one of those sorts of classes. Chris assumes that if he can see the lens, then everything can be seen by the lens. He has no idea what it means to be in focus of a shot, and is constantly standing way out of center, or putting stuff so close to the camera you can't even tell what you're looking at. A shining example is a video to Jackie in which he swore on the Bible, yet the poor framing makes it impossible to tell whether the object he holds is actually a book, let alone a Bible. When handling the camera work directly, Chris often attempts to experiment with the camera's positioning without properly considering what his audience will see. And as such, we are on the receiving end of many masterpieces. Additionally, his lack of proper equipment or controlled coordination tends to weigh down such endeavours with constant shaking or disorientating angles, especially in videos where he moves around. And owing to Chris's weight, it would also be curtailed to the house partially shaking. I don't think that's a thing that's happened before, but, well, yeah, Chris has the sort of hand-eye coordination as well for dancing, let alone photography work, than an elephant suffering some sort of seizure. And by the way, in case you're wondering, if you want to see the sort of examples of like cinematography, even in all walks of life, just take a look at like any Christopher Nolan movie, or go watch something like Mr. Lucky POV. He gets the idea behind it immediately, because you know what? It's so simple that it's almost stupid, but it's something that just works. In some of his more recent videos, such as Doxing Jeff/Francine from November 2015, Chris has taken to using the image stabilizing feature on his iPhone to help steady his shaky handy recordings. The result is a wobbly image against a mostly black background where the videos are put up to YouTube, which doesn't make things any much better. Yeah, considering that we know Chris doesn't own or have access to things like Adobe software, such as Premiere Pro, After Effects, Audition, Photoshop, Illustrator, or any of these sorts of things, well, call it what you may, ladies and gentlemen, about Adobe's like systems and how they may or may not be responsive, but I've been using Adobe for 10 years, and if I can make it work, then you'll make it work. Focus. Something that Chris, we know, struggles for many years, but let's keep going. Chris relies extensively on autofocus. Autofocus usually works with a slight delay, and it usually can't focus on subjects that are too close to the camera. Many cameras have a specific autofocus mode or require manual focus for macro photography. And judging by some rather blurry shots in A Week with Christian Weston Chandler, probably shot with a 35mm SLR camera from the school. He can't even get the latter right. While professional photographers do use autofocus, it is less common for serious video work, and unheard of on professional filmmaking. Focus pullers are still hired for a reason. They're not just, so they make the smaller images look bigger, if that makes sense. In fact, when I was in Hartlepool a couple of days ago, I got to see and actually work firsthand with the sorts of cameras that you can't buy, but you can only hire for days at a time. And these cameras are like so incredibly big and bulky, and they have every single from like a small computer that is just the battery pack, little like windows that open up which give out distinctions on autofocus, and also things like whether or not there needs to be like a tint. That's the thing as well with these cameras, is that you can actually manually operate inside as to whether or not a filter needs to be applied over them. It works in some cases, not all the time, but these are the sort of things they have. Now, of course, while these cameras can't necessarily operate operate the boom, well, again, that's why we have boom operators and sound editors, and that's why these things have been around for nearly 100 years, and they're not just going to go away just because we found ways of like making the works of our cameras even better. That's partly the reason why I use an actual microphone as opposed to just having my Jellycomb webcam just record all the sound, is because I've tried to record the sound on that before, and the results between that and either my Razer Siren 2 microphone or my Blue Snowball, the differences are like night and day. And again, you're better off going to asking people who know far more about these sorts of things in the atmosphere or the realm of cinematography as well as professional filmmaking, probably more than I do. My expertise is writing for these sorts of things, and even at a pinch, editing is something I could get myself into, but it depends who it is, I suppose. That's sometimes what it comes down to. Lighting. Light is the essence of vision. Photography comes from the Greek word for writing with light. Most photographers, even casual iPhone users, know that lighting can make or break an image, and no amount of sliding through apps or going through Instagram's filtration systems is going to change that anytime soon. It's here, and it's here to stay. This basic fact escapes Chris. Classic era videos. Most of Chris's YouTube videos have been lit completely wrong. Plainly put, if you're making videos indoors, you've got to turn the room lights on. Human brains can automatically adjust to different color temperatures, but film and video cameras either lack the automata to handle this or are constantly struggling in bad lighting conditions to figure out what the hell is going on. Cameras also have to amplify the weaker image of a dark scene, resulting in a grainy, staticky image. Chris assumes, however, that if there's enough natural light coming in for him to see anything at all, then the video is lit properly. Good job, Chris. Print. As a result, many of Chris's indoor video shots have a distinct, disgusting yellow tint that makes it look like it was shot in a jar filled with pee. Indeed, many have compared Chris's videos of that of Piss Christ. Of course, it also doesn't help the fact that he's never heard of white balance. This is somewhat subverted with his videos shot on his iPhone and his PlayStation camera, but other factors hamper down whatever merit he gets out of it. And by the way, Chris's clueless flash photography is one of the reasons why he knows so little about his room and so much about his wardrobe and skin conditions. I mean, it's even with the light on, it wouldn't make this image look any better, or it wouldn't have made the mountains of trash in his room just disappear, or even the wall of fail to just magically go away. Backlighting. Many of Chris's photographs, as in the scrapbook and A Week with Christian Chandler, have been shot against light, i.e. camera facing the light source. This usually leaves the subjects in shadow and obscures the details. Backlighting isn't always a bad thing when done outdoors. It will highlight the subject's hair and create a beautiful halo effect, especially during a sunset, and it can flatter subjects who would squint if facing the sun. However, the technique isn't nearly as flattering when attempted indoors, and it generally requires proper exposure editing and or HDR to get it right. Since nearly all of Chris's work is shot indoors, you can guess how well it turns out. Now, bear in mind, I should also point out, this is only really criticizing the presentation, the mise-en-scène, and everything, going towards the videos that Chris puts out there. It hasn't got anything to do with the actual content itself. Well, in a way. Flash photography. Chris also commits a common novice mistake in thinking that camera flash completely negates the need for proper lighting. A naive view of if it's day, everything is okay, but if it's night or you're indoors, then you just use the flash. In fact, flash will highlight the front of the scene, but it can also overexpose the shot of the subject is too close to the camera. Other results of using flash without other light include heavy contrast, unlit backgrounds, and stark shadows, all thanks to the inverse square law. Again, some photographers use this as an artistic effect, especially for dramatic shots, but Chris's sloppy approach doesn't add anything to the image. And again, these are just things that I just straight up learned when I was in school, and well, I think Chris must have been absent that day. Today, as of October 2015, Chris has begun lighting his room before filming it, as evidenced in videos like Thank You from Christian Chandler and Hello Lady Fans with lack of green tint. So far, this shift has stuck, as of all of Chris's videos from that point onwards are lit sufficiently. However, sufficiently is the bare minimum. Many dedicated YouTubers will use specialized video lighting or put some care into light placement, making sure the subject receives the right amount of brightness from the right angles. Chris, on the other hand, uses nothing but the overhead lights in his room, which spread a bit of light throughout the room from straight down. The resulting image is mediocre, flat, and unflattering, much like a DMV photo. Oh, and by the way, just so I can prove that I'm not a hypocrite or anything like that, this is what it looked. This is basically my presentation with no lights turned on. So let me show you the difference. Oh yeah, that's right. Okay, so that's my big light on, and this is the two lights on either side of my desk, and you see how this sort of it makes things better. There feels like there's actual like lighting going on, and it feels just how I've done it before. It also kind of almost eliminates the distinction if it's like shot between night or day in many cases, I suppose. Post-production. Where is it? As inept as he is at video production, he's equally bad at post-production as well. A good example of this is whenever he needs to put text on the screen during his videos. Even the simplest video editing software like Windows Movie Maker or iMovie will allow you to easily put text on the screen and make it so that anyone watching the video can read it. Whether it's changing the color of the font or adding a drop shadow, Chris doesn't do this, opting instead to write the text on a piece of paper and film it with his camera. Probably the best example of this was seen in the July 10th messages, where at the start of each of the videos, he films a piece of paper with a YouTube username while informing us that the video we're about to see is addressed to said user shown. In one of his videos, he has a message below that username because he never bothers to focus the camera is completely unreadable. This wouldn't be a problem if he could just use software to add text to the video and save a lot of people all the aggro at, describing these sorts of things. He did once use video editing software, albeit a really basic one that's built into the PlayStation Eye software, to add text and effects in his entry into the Parappa the Rapper contest that the no-good Adam Stackhouse ended up winning. The result is the video makes even less sense than it did without using the editing software. The effects added to the video were all of stock effects, most of which made no sense in the context of the video. For example, in one part, Chris put up a graphic that just reads "Happy Birthday Boy" on the screen, even though the video had nothing to do with his birthday. One can argue, though, that this was an attempt at his random access humour, and that it's not supposed to make sense. But unfortunately, Chris was trying to present that he was the best freestyle rapper for Parappa the Rapper, and, well, here it is.
AP Station. My name is Christian Chandler. I live in Bucksville, Virginia. I have a PSP. I like to rap. I play with the rapper. I go with you now. The only song I know is Master Onion, which I got from a demo I borrowed from my friend Megan. I had the PSP and she dope. Like test me, I'm sure you'll find that you all things that I teach you sure to beat ya. Over the rest of that to listen to the teacher.
Again, we could also take the time to take in the fact that one corner of his room is so dazzlingly bright and one is so dark. And again, but considering how the focus makes basically the whole video looks like a mess anyway, but
now kick.
you know,
kick, punch,
just
punch,
slide,
chop,
screen sliding. It's like
block, block.
no real
Once
reason.
more, kick, kick, punch, punch, chop, chop, and block, block. Don't get cocky. You gotta get lucky. We got to get we gotta move down to the sea jockey now. Duck, duck. Yup, yup. Turn, turn, and pose, pose. Now listen carefully. Jump, jump. Pose, pose. Duck,
What am I even
duck.
looking at right
And
now?
turn, turn. Yeah, I see you getting better. Kick it to the limit
Useless
in order to
little-
get to
like,
turn
it's
now.
those stupid like little
Kick,
mouse
punch,
software ads, and
kick,
then
punch.
somebody put like the harsh outlines
Chop,
filter.
block.
That, you know when you
Chop,
just sort of like
block.
piss and mess
Chop,
around
kick.
with things on Photoshop,
Chop,
like
kick.
filters and stuff like that,
Punch,
until
block.
you find something
Punch,
that
block.
actually suits your thing.
I'm gonna
That's
get
well.
harder now. Duck and jump.
Chris doesn't really get
Get
that
jump.
sort of anyway because nothing about this is
Turn
making
and
sense.
pose. Turn and pose. Duck and turn. Duck and turn. We're gonna jump and pose. Jump, pose. Go on now. Why'd you follow my
Anyway,
way?
that's it.
Because we're almost done. They'll make
Shut up, Chris. That's about as much as I'm willing to get into, so let's keep going. This is not to say he can't edit, because there are a couple of music videos that show that he can, indeed, put shots together in a way that the video conveys a message that it's supposed to. This is present in his music videos for Holding Out for a Hero and Boyfriend. Of course, they both suck, but the fact that he can at least put shots together proves that if he could just learn how to use editing software properly for more than just putting shots together, he could be a filmmaker. Then again, he never learns anyway, so why waste your breath? When the video is uploaded to YouTube, most of the time Chris doesn't even bother to name it. Wow, that is like the most amateurish of the amateur hours if ever I've seen one. And when he does, he leaves the .mov extension in the video title, suggesting that his videos are uploaded in the QuickTime format. Obviously, he wouldn't bother using any of his monthly tugboat purchasing a Mac, where they are better things to spend your tax dollars on, but never mind. Whether the computer in the kitchen has software that exports to QuickTime, or his camera uses SD cards or other flash memory in a way that he can simply upload the video from the memory is still a mystery. Which is... Well, listen, QuickTime's actually quite good if, well, from what you're seeing above is that these things have to be exported through Premiere Pro via QuickTime and then saved as like an animation folder. So that... And also, again, these would have to be like RGB +8 so that there's no backgrounds involved and they are exported as the graphics as presented. So that's just, again, just things that happen in post. But there are lots of probably other little things I could do as well. But the problem is that, I mean, I may have mentioned before, is that it makes actually exporting a lot of things through Premiere Pro a slog and a half. Even with the bitrate turned as low as 3, it can... Like, a 20-minute video can take nearly 2 hours to render. In some favoured comedians, Chris, in an attempt to insert clips for comparison, records the TV screen, recording things off the TV screen without extra preparation, often results in a completely unwatchable picture. Look, he killed me with a stun. And this is no exception. As if the camera is focused on the TV, everything else in the room is darkened with a series of black lines appear on the screen. In this case, because the camera isn't focused, the TV shows nothing but bright, unfocused colours. Most people would think that actually editing the clips in might be a far more sensible strategy. Or Chris shows us clips from The Cleveland Show and Family Guy, shows that are readily available online and on Amazon Instant Video, iTunes and DVD. However, knowing YouTube's notoriously broken copyright system, which would allow Fox to take it down immediately. It's possible Chris did this intentionally to avoid getting a copyright strike. Here or there. In Lars is Jivin.mp4, Chris uses a very obvious and clumsy jump cut to disguise the fact that he missed the camera when he first tried to throw a tape dispenser at it. Chris can't even take screenshots. A novice action properly without screwing it up. As one can see in the Family Guy picture shown at the right, not only does it display that Chris is unaware of software that can capture images on computer screens, one of which is bundled with Windows computers, the shot he took of his computer screen is blocked by glare from the background lights, as well as the watermark that appears when a Hulu video is paused. And finally, we move into, well, animation, specifically for Chris. Chris used to make stop-motion Lego animations, which were shot with the Game Boy camera and transferred to videotape, and eventually the DVD. Using a combination of the Super Game Boy and a VCR, the main problem with these animations was the grainy picture quality, breakneck pace, and lack of post-processing editing. These are very visible breaks in the animation. As such, it's very difficult to make sense of what's going on in these animations. Not just because of things like hardware limitations, but the fact that if Chris was going to make something a bit more coherent, he would have spent a lot more time on it. And don't get me wrong, ladies and gentlemen, even if you are using something that could only record 30 frames, not 30 frames per second, but just 30 frames, then you can go back and forth just to make more if you chose. Later on, Chris started doing Lego animations with a regular video camera. A Solitude Day and Playing House are good examples of this. These efforts are all wrecked by being out of focus, and Chris's hands blocking the view most of the time when anything worthwhile happens. Nowadays, creating stop-motion animations is relatively simple with just about any digital camera and video editing software. But this is probably way out of Chris's technical competency and lack of patience. It's probably why Chris never thought about being an animator, because the level of methodical process that goes into these sorts of things is like almost incomprehensible, because the proper methods for how things are done are not technically real when they're going on. You just sort of get on with it a bit. Chris showed significant improvement in animation with the release of A Moment with Dr. Wolf, Chris Chan and Greater Struggles. Not only did he improve his filming techniques, he even occasionally uses scene transitions, demonstrating a limited knowledge in special effects and editing. Green screen. In Chris's 2023 return to social media, he began posting videos recording with a green screen as the backdrop. This enabled alternating backgrounds to be displayed, such as a Colosseum in Setting the Record Straight, There Was Never Any Sex Involving Me in 2021, and fan art of Sonichu and Rosechu in The Return of Jesus Christ Sonichu Prime. Occasionally, there were technical mishaps, and the green screen feature in Angelica Rosechu's Christmas play, Chris's blue-coloured hair is blended into the woods-themed backdrop. In first JCWCSP gaming livestream, Chris holds up his green-coloured pickle stress toy, but it blends into the red-coloured backdrop. I mean, these again just sort of things that could be ironed out in hindsight, so I don't think it's too bad. Other photography failures. A Week with Christian Chandler includes a bunch of black and white photographs that were apparently done as part of a photography course. The photographs themselves are probably shot on 35mm SLRs, with manual irises and focuses, and considering how many problems Chris nowadays has with digital cameras with automatic exposure, control and focus, the results are not entirely unexpected. Unlike colour photography, however, black and white film and prints are easy to develop without complicated processes and overly expensive chemicals, so letting kids develop their own photos in school makes sense. However, failure is never too far away. Chris's report is almost a complete collection of common black and white photo development newbie mistakes. Most prints are over or underexposed, resulting in an overly dark or overly bright print. Some have edges or corners underexpressed, and one even has an underexposed band going through the image, which means that someone in the darkroom didn't quite grasp the idea of not putting anything between the enlarger's head and the paper while the print is exposed. Some have smudges and fingerprints in resulting prints, owing to handling photography paper with wet or dirty hands before putting it in an enlarger. One has visible dust for the same reasons. Again, these are the sorts of things that usually I had to iron out in my first term when I was doing photography, but that was still, God almighty, that was like nearly 10 years ago. I can't believe that. The photos in the report, as well as some older photographs, particularly the ones in the slideshow, have visible striping on them. This is also very likely due to the images being rescans of inkjet printed photographs, combined with DVD compression artifacts. And for the most part, ladies and gentlemen, that is actually the end where it comes to Chris and his cameras. If Chris actually learned to sort of like, now we know probably YouTube, as far as, trying to broadcast himself, it wasn't 100% probably in Chris's interest to do this. For the most part, the reasons why he took to YouTube was just to express whoever he was angry at the moment and whoever he decided he was in love with that day. But still, as I mentioned before, it could have been a way for Chris to like make money off YouTube through the things he did. But if Chris was just doing it just to get his messages across, that would have been fine, I guess. But it still seems a bit haphazard, to say the least, that this is like the best he could come up with. But with all that being said and done, I'm not an expert on the subject, but even I could have like highlighted several glaring issues that Chris probably should have been taken on board with if A, he wants to be taken a bit more seriously through what he does out of professionalism, or Chris should have just stuck to getting on with it instead of lambasting the trolls over some new scheme that Clyde Cash had come up with in the middle of the night. And with all that being said and done, I hope to see all of you guys again in the next video. Take care, and bye-bye for now. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and I welcome all of you back to another Chris Chan Quickie Reading, where today, ladies and gentlemen, going through the array, I should say, about Chris's history with electronics or technology, we now go to Chris and his plethora of electronics that he has hoarded/collected over the years. So, let's get started. Chris has a long, arguably addictive relationship with electronics, yet he sometimes still struggles with their basic operation and maintenance. His most important tool is arguably his computer, his window to the world. Chris uses it to connect to the internet, to talk with his fans, circa, and to promote his way of life. Sadly. Needless to say, just like everything else he owns, Chris manages to ruin it in some way, going through several over the years. And it all begins at the very top. Origins. It's no secret that autistic people can excel when put behind a mouse and keyboard. Chris, the autistic challenge that he was introduced to computers as a toddler by his technically inclined father. According to Chris, Bob led him into the digital world with a Commodore 64. In 2018, Chris, feeling nostalgic, dug out said Commodore 64 and requested help from his fans to repair it. When Chris's ludicrous claim that he started playing on the computer at 6 months is obviously false, he definitely started structuring his life around computers at a very young age and has never viewed reality without the filter of a PC. Chris would go on to a major in a CAD degree, combining his artistic interest with his attachment to the tool that made his saga possible. He dabbed in HTMLs after taking a relevant college course, surely feeling like an accomplished computer scientist in the process. I mean, one step at a time, I suppose. Chris's equipment. Chris has had experience with older bits of technology. In a tweet from the 1st of June 2021, he discovered his early childhood. Part of the tweet mentioned that the Chandler family owned a Capacitance electronic disc player, which was a failed early 80s video format that worked in a similar fashion to vinyl records, but used plastic caddies for storage and loading the discs into the player. So it's basically like an 80s version of a Squareo or a Laserdisc. Basically very defunct bits of history that sort of had their part in lasering the way into how we got into the conditions of where we are. Possibly equivalent to, let's say, even the Nissan Leaf. Technically, it's sort of not really the first electronic car, but there have been plenty of electronic cars since, like Teslas and even Citroen and Renault have like taken this on board. And bear in mind, even in 10 years' time, electronic cars are going to be the mainstream from now on. And you could almost argue immediately is that even technology from the 80s that didn't catch on certainly was the step in the right direction, you may say, from cassettes to DVDs to wireless. Basically, we've sort of evolved a little bit, and it's mostly to save resources and to make things almost instantaneous, that we can attain things almost immediately. Chris still had the CED machine as late as 2005. It can be seen in a photo of himself taken around that time. The CED player was probably destroyed in the 2014 house fire. Probably was. Oh, and by the way, that is actually this huge chunk of metal which looks almost like the not the Omega CD32, but almost like that Panasonic console that basically looked like an ordinary video recorder except a bit more square. This one looks like there's something that belongs like on the dashboard of a car, or maybe from like an 80s Cadillac, for example, owing to probably how wide the thing is. And good lord, that's like where you would put the discs. I've never seen anything like. Usually I'll expect something to be like maybe half the length, maybe even a third of the length, but that thing looks like it could eat an entire pizza on its own. Chris also had a lengthy history with the CED's more successful competitor VHS cassettes, having grown up when it was the dominant home video format prior to the rise of an eventual supplanting by DVDs in the early 2000s. Much of the available footage we have of Chris prior to the mid-2000s came from videotapes. The videos on the Yep, I'm on TV DVD were transferred off of deteriorated VHS tapes, including both of his TV appearances. The photos were most likely scanned with a computer scanner, and the quality of that scanner is so low that rainbow streaks are present on most slides. Now, listen, I don't want a slight tangent I want to go on for this moment is that when I was like 4 years old and I was just about basically starting school, is that I must have been probably one of the last maybe one of the last few generations that whenever, like when I was in reception class, they would still wheel in a television, quite a big television with a VHS video recorder underneath, and they would put in like videotapes of, let's say, The Jungle Book or some other Disney cartoon at the time. They would even go on to like those early childhood education tapes, and I'm pretty sure at some point we all sort of know what those are before things like, Coco Melon or Peppa Pig were invented. And bear in mind, Peppa Pig came out roughly a whole year after I started school, so we're talking 2004. So I can actually remember quite a lot of those those VHS education tapes quite well. And bear in mind, I wouldn't have to think about that for at least, from something from 22 years ago. But I think what's kind of nostalgic in a sense, looking back on this, is the fact that smartboard technology, which for those living in the UK and who were going through, primary school in the 2000s, will be pretty familiar with these things. I don't even remember if I was even ever in a classroom where we even had chalkboards anymore. We had like whiteboards, and well, the rest is history. Chris also had a sizable collection of softcore porn recorded to videotape. Well, there's also that. Not quite nostalgic because, there was no way I would even know how to have, that's one of those things. Chris is shown in the Chandler Family Christmas 2004, attempting to get his father to choose between a DVD or a dubbed bootleg, a VHS copy of Fraggle Rock. That's okay. In August 2016, Chris attempted to sell his copy of Disney's Aladdin for a whopping $3,000, under the incorrect guise that the Black Diamond Disney tapes were worth a lot of money. In reality, this is only the price that some sellers are asking for. It's highly unlikely people are spending that much on an ultra-common tapes that can be found at thrift stores for 50 cents, if they're not just straight up giving them away. In Chris's third house tour, recorded on the 9th of March 2018, he shows off boxes with old VHS tapes in them, saying they belong to Mr. C. These are likely the remaining VHS tapes in his collection that weren't lost in the house fire. In August 2018, Bob threw out a number of Chris's old VHS tapes, including his classic t-shirt. Chris, in response, abused and humped a pillow effigy representing Bob in front of her. Ew. It is unknown if Bob's VHS tapes were part of the dumping, but it's probably unlikely. I'm actually kind of a little bit surprised that Bob would probably throw out things for the very first time in her life, but there you go. Chris also had a retro-themed sonotube called VHS. Desktop computers. As of 2010, Chris used his family's HP Pavilion desktop computer, located in his kitchen. It ran Windows XP, had a scanner and a printer, or perhaps a scanner/printer combo that allowed him to scan comic books and print artwork, and had a version of Adobe Photo Deluxe installed on it, which Chris primarily used to type in text bubbles for his comics or to alter the truth. Since he had been able to connect to Mumble voice chats and effectively watch YouTube channels, it was presumed that Chris's computer also had a broadband internet connection, which was slightly rarer in rural areas at the time, but not unheard of. Laptop computers. An August 2011 video, however, revealed that Chris had a new computer loaded with Windows 7. Another video confirmed to it have been a hand-me-down HP laptop. Chris claimed that he had upgraded it, but further details are unknown. The laptop also had Mozilla Firefox and iTunes installed on it. Okay, again, nostalgia. Again, who here remembers Firefox? I mean, I do, but I can't honestly remember the last time I properly used it. Basically, I just use Google Chrome as my default browser and possibly, what's it called? The AVG Secure browser. I mean, I know it's quite commonplace for quite a lot of people, but I suppose it's just like, you know. I mean, again, I also use things like Microsoft, search. I've never used Bing, and Internet Explorer hasn't been a thing in circulation for at least 6-7 years, I think, at this point. Most of Chris's computers appear to have survived the fire, including his laptop and his upstairs PC. Although some data was lost, Chris used his iPhone to communicate with his fans on Facebook and upload videos to YouTube during his year of exile. The rental house apparently had a computer and an internet connection, so it is possible that Chris used it as well. As of 2017, Chris owns an Asus gaming laptop that he used for live drawing streams and to play Steam. Mobile computers and smartphones. From at least the early 2010s, Chris has been a loyal user of the iPhone. In 2013, he built the Idea bookcase to hold his iPhone 5 and 2 iPod Touches he'd switch out for different content. I'd say it's actually quite a little bit of a novel approach when it comes to Chris, and while I do have to say I wonder what the point of owning 2 iPod Touches is when you already own an iPhone which already has the music for it. Whatever, it's just a way of Chris to be like never off the move, I suppose. He used the iPhone for anything requiring cell service, and the iPods for media and light computing. As of 2018, Chris has 2 identical iPhones, okay, that I still don't really understand, one for business and the other for personal calling. What exactly Chris requires for business, I don't think I'll ever understand and probably ever know, so whatever. He most likely can afford the deal because phone companies regularly offer buy one get one specials on new units. As of 2021, his phone number for personal calls is something I am going to edit out, because, to be honest, I'm not going to be held accountable or responsible for docking Chris, and it's not particularly a great thing to do anyway, so there you are. For some reason it's there, I have absolutely no idea if it's even true, and I would not recommend anybody ever to find it out, so that's that. In May 2020, Chris got an iPad and stylus to attempt digital art. It's unknown if he's done anything substantial whatsoever. Computer troubles. To hear Chris tell it in the 2010s, his computer was on its last legs. In his conversation with Alec Benson Leary, Chris complained that multiple power surges resulting from blackouts in the area had disabled his computer for days at a time, forcing him to restore it constantly. In mid-February 2010, this was his excuse for failing to regularly upload new comic pages. When Alec reasonably asked him why he didn't just buy a new, more reliable computer, Chris claimed that he didn't have the money. A low-end replacement for his machine, powerful enough on its purposes, would have only cost him a few $100s, but apparently Chris had better things to buy, or literally just go down to his library and just scan his stuff in there. I mean, he did upload videos via his library like a few months later, but why he didn't think to do this for this instance, for to meet his actual obligations for the Solitude comics, I will never know. Chris often claimed to be unable to upload videos for Jackie or chat with her via instant message because he couldn't get his computer to start up. This caused him so much stress and discomfort because he worried that she would feel that he was neglecting her and would break up with him. Chris complained that he didn't have the money for a new PC, but all the while continued to buy new games for his second PlayStation 3. To make things worse, Chris revealed that there was a second working PC in the house, and the only reason he didn't attempt to use it is that it was blocked by a pile of clothes, which incidentally was the same excuse for him not showering. I'm surprised. No words. Just no words. Computer literacy. Despite having taken a course in computer construction, Chris did not know the difference between RAM and a hard drive space. When confronted about forgetting things so often, he claimed that his memory worked like RAM, believing that random in RAM means it only works some of the time, or randomly, despite the fact that it almost means the exact opposite, that it can access any requested piece of information at any time regardless of order. And the taser. Chris believed that he could shock his quartz crystals through the use of his phenomenon of piezoelectricity to create portals. He believed he could use a taser to shock some of his magic stones as a means to starting the dimensional merge. In reality, I'm surprised like Chris's legs probably still worked after something like that, or if he succumbed to his injuries as a result of zapping to the extreme. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was Chris's love and his electronics collections. A fairly short, very simple little video for what it is. The only real things I can think about adding to this, I suppose, is the fact that, again, with all of these level of technologies, from his iPods to his iPhone to his computers, his laptop, one might have thought Chris would have had the fortitude to actually be pseudo-productive to even running a very small, quaint little studio, but no, that's giving Chris way too much credit, and for other reasons we'll get into, just actually getting him to do anything is the least of the problems when it comes to production. But with all that being said and done, I hope all of you guys have enjoyed this video, and I cannot wait to see all of you guys again in the next video. Take care, and bye-bye for now. Hello and welcome back, and I welcome all of you back to another Chris Chan quickie reading. This time, as we go through his spouses with the technological world, we now have to cover into the WWW, the World Wide Web. And do you guys think it's a little bit curious that you could say World Wide Web faster than WWW? I don't know, it's just one of those things. So let's just go through this one at a time, because you may argue that if it wasn't for the internet, Chris could have had a much better life, or if he just learned how to use it properly. But, well, with quite a lot of the things that have happened in Chris's life, I think, well, learning to handle things properly, yes, absolutely, but then again, do you really think people would have, have been that interested if it wasn't for what Chris did? I doubt it. Chris would have been a peculiar interest, but that doesn't count for quite a lot of other things, and, well, let's get started, shall we? I really detest the memes, MEMES, from Chris. He probably also detests this, which is his dad, Bob, or the internet lumberjack, as they've fondly called him, in this small little cartoon image of Bob, for some reason wearing a red hat, is going to cut the internet down. If he had, he probably could have saved Chris a lot of the aggro, and we probably wouldn't even be having this conversation. So, thank Bob, I suppose, for not doing it, I guess. The internet, the bloodstream of our very saga, it is a computational system that allows the transmission of data over long distances through a massive collection of networks connected all over the world. The internet has grown immensely since its first real conception in the 1980s, as a means for the military and later universities to communicate with each other. It is said that about 4.8 billion people are connected to the internet today, which is just over half the Earth's population at this very moment. One of those people is Chris, the internet's battered girlfriend who always comes back for more. Well, can't really say he's lying, and bear that in mind, ladies and gentlemen, if it wasn't for the internet, you probably wouldn't be watching this video, I wouldn't be making this video, and Chris would not be continuing to make bombastic claims that somehow Hasbro is in cahoots with Vladimir Putin to create My Little Pony Gen 5 just to piss Chris off. So, let's get started, shall we? The understanding. Chris seems to be aware that the internet is a place where, once you put something up, anyone with access to a computer can see it. However, due to a combination of his ego and his general inability to understand others, Chris has come to the conclusion that if he puts anything on the internet, everyone will see it. And if you direct a message to someone, only they will see it. Chris has in the past attempted to address videos to specific people, from celebrities to potential employers to internet girlfriends. Most telling is his 8th of May 2010 rant, which was addressed to anyone who served on the Greene County School Board in the 1990s. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what that video is that Chris came back from an extreme sports event and he saw two people in a relationship holding hands, and Chris felt a sense of immense loneliness. This, however, coupled together with the fact that only days earlier, Chris basically committed anti-Semitism against Michael Snyder. But that's besides the point. It's whether you really feel bad for Chris is, well, somewhat here nor there. It depends who you ask. Chris sees no problem in revealing highly sensitive information in his videos, including his phone number, street address, and the secret name of the girl he desperately wanted to be his sweetheart. He doesn't understand that YouTube is a public website and not an instant messaging service. Never paying attention to the deluge of comments he gets from horrified onlookers that definitively prove his private messages are anything but. Chris has been on the internet for some time, yet does not understand how to act online any more than he does in real life. While many users of the internet contribute content and are polite and helpful, and generally follow any established rules, Chris sees all websites as vehicles to spew his self-serving version of the truth. Even worse, when giving his own website, he was a dick, claimed that it was he who had control over the site, not the sysop or system operator who did the work of setting it up, or the advertisers who were responsible for paying for it. Out of fear of trolls, Chris refuses to meet people online. Well, I would say that's quite commonplace. You really should be thinking twice about whether you should meet anybody on the internet, or interact with people he knows beyond closed doors. He has tried to join public forums at least a couple of times without attaching his name to the account, but has outed himself either on his own or through his unusual and distinctive writing styles, abandoning them when he feels unsafe from his trolls. In the recent years, though, he has been very active on Facebook, Twitter, and Discord, using them as safe spaces and content bubbles to bask in his own glory. He was in multiple self-serving groups such as The Place, the Golden Church of Sonichu, or the Knights of Quick, which served as places to spew out his horrid ideas and worldviews in a regulated environment to people who won't be bothered by it. When it was possible, Chris opted to either block people who spoke against him or use multiple sock puppet accounts to view people who have blocked him instead, a typical show of his hypocrisy. I think I've discussed this when it comes down to censorship, but according to Chris, well, there's no depths to which you can't sink, and as long as you can do it and get away with it, that is all that matters anyway. The Fora. Chris does not normally participate in forum discussions, either due to a dislike of reading, simple egotism, or both. When he does, he probably thinks that Chris would be under the impression that somebody should be reading for him. I think that's kind of like the logic of how this goes. He always signs his message, but be it a comment on YouTube, a rant on Adult Swim boards, or a complaint about something in Little Big Planet, or either Adam Stackhouse. He never follows up on these posts either, nor does he read the comments left by other users, just like on YouTube. Any retractions or responses are saved for completely unrelated posts everywhere on the internet. Common sense would suggest... No, that common sense isn't really a word that exists in Chris's world. That's way too obvious. That common sense would suggest that Chris would fare well in the internet forums, which are heavens for socially inept 30-something weeaboo man-children who still live with their parents. However, Chris has managed to fail here too, by appearing in the webcomic as his usual nicknames or full names and plastering Sonichu crap all over the place. He draws the attention and ire of trolls and reacts predictably when they follow him. More importantly, if the trolls somehow fail to notice his new hangouts, he's quick to make enemies completely out of his own accord, due to his ego, selfishness, and complete disregard of rules. Well, what else is new, aka the sky is blue. Chris is, or has been active on many other mediums of the internet. He has run his own blogs and websites, posted videos on YouTube, and communicated with the outside world through social media sites such as MySpace, Twitter, and Facebook. Rest in peace, MySpace. It was only, though, through Chris's existence or extensive activity on these mediums that made him the complication of this huge, extensive wiki possible. Thank the moderators for the wiki for that. As of 2018, however, Chris's online activity has transformed from a naive man-child's accidental comedy act to the insane ramblings of an unhinged madman. Probably World of T-shirts will probably be turning into the latter in possibly only a few weeks' time, if World of T-shirts does not die suddenly one day from alcohol poisoning. Yeah, I know that as well. Bans. As with many places in real life, Chris has found himself banned from a few places he frequents online. Thanks to his screwed up conversational filter, Chris has done stupid things and stupid stuff, and has also had stuff taken down or been banned from places online. However, due to his relative inactivity concerning internet forums, he's banned from fewer places online than you would expect. He was banned from DeviantArt in the summer of 2009 for posting the uncensored version of Sonichu Issue 9 without a NSFW tag, though he doesn't understand why. Comments he left on the Wikipedia suggest that he is under the impression that his DA account simply vanished into cyberspace for no reason. He was also banned earlier for the uncensored version of Sonichu Issue 8, despite bouncing from one account to the next. Chris has only been banned once from YouTube. However, unlike DA, Chris has constantly made new accounts after one was taken down or simply abandoned. He has also had posts moderated at Game FAQs when he attempted to solicit money for special characters in Mod Nation races. When his article on the Wikipedia was deleted and his talk page there got trolled, his account was indefinitely blocked. Although the blocking admin mistakenly thought he was a sock puppet of a troll and not the real deal. Interesting. His most grievous ban to date involves Flipnote Tina. Between the 29th of June and the 2nd of July, Chris had the same Flipnote removed from the site 4 times because of its sexual nature. With Chris thinking it was banned removed by trolls instead of realizing the fact that a Nintendo-owned site wouldn't like having animated sex streams being put on their site. Because of this and other Flipnotes he had uploaded and then re-uploaded without learning his lesson the first time, the mods briefly blocked Chris's DSI from uploading any further Flipnotes. When his ban expired, Chris resurfaced on the website and re-uploaded all the Flipnotes that got him banned in the first place. Way to go, Chris, you absolute moron. The entire situation wasn't helped by try-hard trolls flagging his animations in a desperate attempt to have an impact. One notices a pattern in all of this. Chris has a tendency to not read a website's terms of service or gain an understanding of websites he uses. When protesting his ban from Wikipedia for violating one of their numerous rules, he argued that he didn't have the time to read the page's bullshit upon pages of fine print that stipulated what constituted acceptable behavior. When faced with a similar conflict on Flipnote, he failed to get the hint that each deleted animation was violating the terms of service. Even uploading a video anyone could tell was inappropriate for the PG-13 website, no less than 4 times before getting his console blocked. as if... And by the way, the only thing Chris did to rectify the problem was to cover up his characters with actual clothing and then leave actual notes saying that he was the legitimate character and that there was no sex or violence involved in his animations. A sentiment that might possibly be true, but it got Chris's animations removed nonetheless. Bans from Orbiters. Attempts to leave the internet. And unfortunately be resumed back into the real world, especially when you know this is skulking about. As the old saying goes, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. However, in Chris's case, he takes this and butchers it. When trolls descend on him and torture him, he gets up and leaves. He's like a child who packs up all of his toys and goes out in the driveway when things don't go his way. For many trolls, this would be a great victory. Threatening to quit the internet forever is such a common reaction to trolling that this is also a term known as flouncing. Of course, his PS3 is still hooked up to the internet, where he plays video games, reads games forums, and logs into YouTube, so he never really leaves for good. He merely changes his outlet. When Chris talks about quitting the internet, he means ceasing video and comic production and no longer tangling with trolls. His first attempt to abandon the internet for good was when the Ivy saga was hitting its peak. Tired of Clyde Cash's trolling, Chris proclaimed that he was leaving the internet. Instead of doing this, he disappeared for all of 2 weeks before creating a new account on YouTube. His second, third, and fourth attempts all seem to have been directed by an outside force. Of course, Chris, being Chris, he never made good on his word to stay off. After he made his second announcement of leaving the internet, he made a rant about the Cleveland Show a mere 36 hours later. He also made his fourth announcement of leaving the internet just 4 days after making his third announcement, saying that the trolls have both made him scared off and scared for him from the internet. He returned just 1 week after the Grand Proclamation. After talking about how he almost committed vehicular homicide, he makes his fifth announcement that he is leaving the internet. Oh, and by the way, this is the general cycle of events, so let me just get the slightly smaller screen up. There we go. Chris comes back on the internet, posts a new video, many laughs are had, optimism about the new trolling opportunities arise. A new troll sweetheart or troll appears. Numerous videos and chats are done, quick trolls are skeptical about the latest Troy ploy, and then the saga ends. Numerous docs are leaked, quick communities analyse a lot of new information that is revealed, trolls still divided on opinions, and then he leaves the internet. Trolls bore about dry spells, trolls also say how Chris has dried up as a lolcow, and Chris sometimes sticks to his deal. In many ways. I guess. We'll see. Nearly 2 weeks after his fifth abandonment of the internet, he was spotted at Fridays After 5 playing Flipnote Studio on his Nintendo DSi. He soon discovered the pictures and videos of him on the internet and broke his exile to post his response to it all on Flipnote the very next day, saying that he wishes trolls would stop spreading his bad reputation around. This shows that not only Chris is still looking out for his internet reputation whilst vehemently staying away from it, but also he also assumes that by telling trolls I'm leaving the internet forever, he expects them to just stop talking about him. This would have been easy for the trolls to do if Chris had just stopped making videos, especially ones addressing them specifically. Not seeking out trolls offline couldn't have hurt his cause either. On the 22nd November 2010, Chris announced that he would be leaving the internet yet again, and began what would become his longest stint away from the internet, for an hitherto unsurpassed period of time. Chris managed to refrain from doing something that would directly attract the attention of the trolls, although he was not completely able to repress his urge to spread his ego over the tubes, and thanks to his PlayStation 3, with web connection and keyboard controller, he still made occasional efforts to make the world realize his greatness. If only. Despite his claims to have stopped socializing online, a new Facebook account bearing a previously unseen photograph of Chris was discovered on the 5th of July 2011, and 2 weeks later it was revealed that between the 29th of May and 20th of June 2011, Chris was frequently frequenting the forum Tomboys and Tomgirls of Virginia while trying and failing to stay anonymous. This culminated with 3 new videos released on the 6th of August 2011 after a 257-day YouTube hiatus. Although unofficial, it is worth mentioning that after the death of Bob in September of 2011, Chris had not returned to YouTube for over 2 years, which broke its previous record of 257 days. Technically, that could have been considered a 7th internet abandonment, with the only exceptions being Facebook and Twitter. However, in November 2013, Chris uploaded a video he recorded the previous month, once again showing that, ultimately, he just can't resist uploading videos or things about himself. He continued to upload videos sparingly throughout 2014 and 15, returning on a regular basis from October 2015 onwards. And these, just for what they're worth, these are, I should say, sorry, hang on one second. There we go. The days when Chris left the internet forever: 30th of March 2009, 21st of March 2010, 27th of May 2010, 31st of May 2010, 6th of June 2010, and 22nd November 2010. All of these are practically the same, and the only things you really need to know about them is that Chris would come back time and time again. And, well, again, another pretty short one, all things considered, but the things to note really of this are one of two things, is that the allure, the spotlight of the internet was just simply too bright for Chris to ignore for good, and the fact that, well, when all is said and done, it's not particularly difficult to see why, because I wonder if Chris, whether he wants to admit it or not, it was perhaps the only way people actually had any sort of level of engagement with him whatsoever. Even if they were not legitimate, it was about the closest thing Chris actually had to solicitating with the real world, and, well, the rest is somewhat history. So, I hope all of you guys have learned something out of this little story, and I cannot wait to see all of you guys again in the next video. Take care, and bye-bye for now. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How are we all doing today? And I welcome back all of you to another Chris Chan Quickie reading, where tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we now have to explore Chris's extremely unfounded, unelaborated, complexing, confusing, unrealistic, unsolicited, completely unfathomable approaches to the world of science. Now, without further ado, let's get started. I had no other clever intro for this, so let's just get to it, shall we? Here we go. Science is the systematic study of the natural world through observation and experimentation. Science can be divided into pure science, which studies natural phenomena, and applied science, which finds practical uses for said phenomena. Chris has an on-off history with science, though it is mostly off. His view on science, nature, and technology is utterly warped. He has lost touch with the times and thinks science is much more ahead in certain fields than it actually is, probably due to him getting all his information through fictional media. He has mixed up real science, pop science, pseudoscience, and other things he has learned from media and enablers to create a very distorted view of nature. Furthermore, Chris struggles with mathematics and numerical reasoning despite boasting otherwise. I mean, your basis for how adept Chris is at science will ultimately depend on whether or not you view the ideas of Chris's theoretical approach to science regarding the dimensional merge is the fact that he literally just drew it on a McDonald's napkin. With the idea that 1218... Well, actually, let's just view this properly, shall we? So, the logic is that 1218, this Earth, is 51% is surviving, with 41% dying, and there's a somewhat of an 8% margin of error. Let's just put aside the fact that that seems a little too accurate to be taken seriously, or the fact that C197, or 61.25, I think, has a 51% of surviving, which 38 points. I'm already losing track of this already, we've just started. So apparently 38.75% of C197's population is going to survive, with 38.75, half of them being OCs, or original characters, with once again there being another 8% margin of error. regular people are referred as 51% of surviving. We have no idea if this accounts for both sides of the cut of the dimensional merge, with once again another 8% margin of error, with 41% of people going to die. So let's just do a quick little math, shall we? If we're assuming that 41% on both sides of the coin are going to die, then that means there's going to be roughly a 102% chance that people are going to survive, which is going to overfill the quota. But if we're assuming there is going to be an 8% margin of error, it still means that there's the potential for the fact that more people, or slightly more people, are going to survive, probably more than anyone anticipated, compared to those who are eventually going to snuff the lid. Bear in mind, with what counts as an OC, could immediately attest to such things as whether or not the body count is going to rise here and there from C-197. We know it won't, but there's that. And also, best outcome of 1218 is that 59% survive, and of C-197, 49% people will die. So it means that... Are you getting all this? Because this is going to be on the test, and well, I think, well, let's just put that behind us, because it doesn't say anything, and it doesn't give us... It gives us an idea that Chris is so completely off the... I wonder exactly who found this napkin, or whether or not Chris just took it home with him. His ego also causes him to reject scientific findings, such as when he rejected the fact that Asperger's syndrome and high-functioning autism are one and the same. I've talked about this before, and I still maintain the idea is that Chris secretly thoroughly knows this, but decides he wants to save face and say horrible things about people with Asperger's for no real reason whatsoever. I mean, you can't fall back on the idea that people with Asperger's are stealing the spotlight from autistic people. It's a concept that is ridiculous on every single face of the earth. So, no. Chris on science itself. Fated moments override numbers. Chris on his views on established scientific data, and deciding to just throw it completely out of the window. Chris comes from a scientific background on his father's side. Bob was a scientific man. He worked as a GE engineer for a large part of his life. He wanted Chris to be into science too, so he had set up a small workshop where he and young Chris would tinker around. Chris's parental half-siblings both had STEM doctorates, with one in particular having made a career as an orthomanthologist, and Chris himself has an applied science associate's degree in CAD. Alas, none of this got Chris deeply interested in science. Which, I know like a little bit of a small tangent here, is that even though there isn't too much of like a scientific background in like my family, that doesn't mean to say, however, that my brother hasn't taken, because my brother is, well, basically that's what he's been working towards ever since 2016, is that he has high aspirations to be a doctor professor. In fact, he is currently in his last year of his biochemistry degree at the University of Dundee, and the idea is that he's got an exam to take at the end of this academic year, and now he's going to be moving on to do a master's degree the next year, and I think it's like 2 years he has to study this in Dundee before he can actually gain his MA, and then he's got to go through like a year or two of studying for a doctorate. And whether or not my brother wants to actually continue his studies at Dundee, or maybe at a different university. I don't know if it's like the University of Sheffield, or if it's the University of or UCL, the University College London, has a very substantial base, or maybe even he could even go to Silicon Valley, or even go study in the US, because stem cell research is absolutely what my brother's talked exclusively about for the last few years, including adult neurogenesis, basically the building blocks to how human beings store memory and how it can be programmed through chemicals, nerves, and specifically the lobes that direct to other parts of the body through the central nervous systems, and how it also connects to all the cerebrals and all the membranes of the brain from the cerebellum to the amygdala, and, well, basically, listen, it's all incredibly fascinating, and I know fine well I've like not really thought, and as well, my sister is actually currently studying for a master's degree in art history, and even though I might seem a little bit like the odd one out when it comes to this sort of thing, it doesn't mean to say that actually pursuing a master's of arts degree was not necessarily outside of my field of interest. I just kind of decided just to sort of like explore a little bit of the world, or to try and like learn a bit more through the world through just trying to be like a normal person, I suppose, even though normal is a concept that is just completely over the hill, I suppose. But yeah, I do appreciate the fact that they went out of their way to say that Bob did come from a very Chris came up with a good parental figure who absolutely wanted, again, at the best of times, I think Bob just wanted the best for his son, as well he did for the rest of his children. But again, Chris had no real desire or interest, which is just kind of sad. It was sad that, dreams didn't come true in that workshop. Alas. Anyway, back to reality. Chris has stated his opinions on science in his OkCupid questionnaire. He said all types of science are interesting to him, though he finds conversations about science to be boring and annoying. Oh. He claims to put equal weight in science and faith, and enjoys finding out how things work. To my money, ladies and gentlemen, Science and Faith, the still most popular album by The Script, but let's stay on script, shall we? And again, to the people who care, I love that album anyway. For the first time, ooh, 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 ooh. Sorry. All these, however, should be taken with a grain of salt, since he was ready to do anything, including lying, to obtain China. Yeah, he would do anything on Earth, but he would also do that. I'm going to stop quoting songs right now, because literally I could just keep that up all day. Dear me. It's like Popmaster, except we're talking about Chris. His actual views on pure science are probably low or non-existent, since he slept through high school. He may have a positive opinion on computer science due to him being hooked on computers since a very young age. Unsurprisingly, Chris is not interested in engineering. All his engineering marvels are shitty duct tape and Lego creations that a child could also make. Also, a device in which he had an iPhone and 2 iPod Touches. Not bad, I suppose, but don't bother taking a patent out on those things anytime soon. iPod Touches have been defunct since 2019, sadly. Pure science. Physics. There are multiple things that are horribly wrong in Sonichu comics, including a lack of regard for the laws of physics. Documenting all these would be impossible, since each page of the comic has some law being broken. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, when I was studying animation at university, one of the things that any good animator would need to know is a great concept on physics, because you had to somehow communicate to the viewer that whether an action was being taken, that it's got to follow a certain trajectory, and even the motion of it had to architect its way into such a manner that the viewer can distinguish how much force there is behind a punch, a jump, or a throw of any description. And with the amount of tweening that usually goes on in these sorts of things, because it's not exactly out of the realm of possibility that any good animator should always be prepared to consider the physical weight of whatever action they produce. However, I think it's even more so in the case of comic books, because there are fewer moving pieces in a comic book than there would be in a piece of animation. So therefore, you would have to make the impact somewhat more impactful with fewer frames. Well, only really one frame, to be honest. And of course, this is something that Chris might have thought about at one point, but they're not communicated very well, owing to scale, poor artwork, poor drawing, disembodied limbs and stuff, and all the rest of it. Stuff that doesn't communicate anything except what it's blatantly supposed to be. which you could say is all that's required, but, well, it's in theory, but in execution it leaves a lot to be desired. Let's just put it like that. All kinds of wacky things happen in the comics, such as light behaving to the wishes of the great director Chandler. Velocity and acceleration are as random as the lottery. Friction becomes fiction. I like the puns they put here. These are actually quite clever. And hypothetical concepts such as parallel dimensions and portals are everyday occurrences that break basically the molecular of a fictional universe somehow. Normally, these discrepancies from reality could be written off as science fiction, but Chris thinks all of this really happened in some other dimension, and it can be considered as a critique of his scientific knowledge. Wild Solitude's conversion, I learned it from a passing Porygon. I didn't realize Porygon had the ability to do that, but whatever. In real life, since Chris has no real powers, bear that in mind, he has to play by the rules of physics, but he maintains an unbending belief in unproven concepts. Most of these beliefs can be traced back to fictional media he likes, such as Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Futurama for the multiple dimensions, and Rick and Morty to prove that there are other people who can traverse dimensions. Chris again attempted to bend the laws of physics in February 2021. Oh god, here it comes. Having plans to use piezoelectricity on his quartz crystals in order to open up a portal to complete the dimensional merge. Chris has discussed this with Kyle, to which he explains to Chris why this wouldn't work and how the article that he is citing does not provide evidence of his claims. Knowing Chris's Lipitor addiction, well, mostly for different reasons, I'm surprised that it would probably just give Chris a heart attack if he did something like that. Oh, and by the way, in case you're wondering, like, where the sun is and why, if we could assume the sun is meant to be somewhere like in like this direction, somewhere like shining down on him, then why is like the shadow like overcoming like the arches of Wild Sonichu's feet? It gives the idea. So if we're meant to believe that the sun is like maybe slightly on top of Wild Sonichu and why the shadow isn't so thick before, then why would there be shading here? Like, shadows are not really known to have shadings. They usually operate on opacity logics, and well, it should just sort of stop at one point. Again, these are the sorts of things you probably need to refresh your memories on, ladies and gentlemen, because I've talked about like the problems with Chris's writing before, but this is like another matter entirely. Something that's very, very difficult to get away from. Also, there's the aspect of dimensions for this road. I'm getting ahead of myself. Chemistry. Chris had 2 gal pals as partners in his chemistry lab. Not much else is known on his views of chemistry, though he probably has low opinions about it due to the rote nature of chemistry and him being a lazy bum. Biology. Chris's history with biology is well documented due to him torturing his body by ramming all sorts of things in holes where they don't belong, while also torturing biologists by making ungodly and anatomical drawings of electric hedgehog Pokemon and shitty morphological drawings of humans. Case in point, Paddy-chan Sonichu. Or was it Paddy-chan Rosechu or something? I don't know. Applied science. Computer science. Out of all the sciences, Chris is probably the best at computer science. Like most people born during or after the 1980s, he has been around computers since his childhood. He took some computer upgrade classes in PVCC, and he bragged to Casey's dad that he's technologically inclined. He coded most of his websites by hand using text editors, that's actually quite impressive, as opposed to using purpose-built HTML editors that do the heavy work for him. Oh. He knows a bit about older computers like the Commodore 64 due to his age and nostalgia. Engineering. Bob tried to get Chris interested in engineering since Chris was young, but to no avail. Though Chris has made a few inventions, such as a case for holding 2 Apple products and a case for holding Pokemon cards. The raw materials Chris uses are limited to Crayola Model Magic, Legos, and duct tape. Due to his new interest in cosplaying, he has started making some accessories to go along with the costume. When he cosplayed as Chris from Pokemon Crystal for BronyCon 2019, he tried to make a Pokegear. Instead of using proper professional materials, he opted to use Crayola model magic. Never mind. Model medicine. Medicine is a field applied to human biology, which helps in keeping a person's health in check. Chris has incredibly poor both mental and physical health, as well as social health. Another problem he creates is by self-medicating and relying on unlicensed people and persons. He did go to a doctor in occasion for his physical health checkups, but refused to go to a proper mental health counsellor and went to his church's pastoral counsellor instead. Recently, he has put in an effort to improve in all fields, but nowhere near what is required to make him a fully functional human being. Then, of course, there's the realm of psychology, which I did a video of previously, so if you do want to know what I think about Chris's approach to mental health care, then you're more than free to do so. God, it was at least like nearly 5 weeks ago since I made that. Where does the time fly? Pseudoscience. Astrology. Chris has almost never spoken about astrology, though he has talked about astrology's older sibling, astrology, which Chris has for a long time told others about his and his creation zodiac signs, to those who care, I suppose, proving he has some belief in it. He has mentioned in an IRC chat that he reads his horoscope daily, and in his February 2012 Facebook posts, posted in detail about his interpretation of his horoscope. In his OkCupid questionnaire, he considered astrology to be a legitimate science, because of course he did. Magic. Chris has shown to have a belief in magic many times. The most notable example is the belief that he had the power to curse people. To what end, ladies and gentlemen, I have no idea. As to whether any of these things worked, I have no idea either. Again, because I live in the real world, I don't believe in magic. I believe friendship is probably magic, but that's about as far as my perceptions of magic are willing to go. Magic stones. A subset of his beliefs in magic, Chris has started purchasing and wearing various semi-precious stones which supposedly mentally calm and heal him. Supposedly is a great point. Well, considering the last video Chris has released where he somehow claimed that Hasbro was in cahoots with the Russians to make My Little Pony Gen 5 just because Chris doesn't like that show, you can only suggest as well as I do as to what help these useless bits of rock have actually done for him. He also purchased an $80 water bottle with some rocks in it which also help him accomplish the same, which is absolutely sod all. Subliminal frequency self-help audio. Here we go. Subliminal frequency hypnosis videos are sets of audio on YouTube consisting of binaural beats, claiming to help listeners do things such as reduce body odor, doesn't work, turn a penis into a vagina, doesn't work, and make your ass fatter and stomach thinner, without having to do any actual work. Designed for gullible idiots who literally would believe anything they're told to get out of the subsequent horror and trials of having actually to do of anything that required any legitimate effort. All of which are claims without any sort of real evidence to their effectiveness, proven, medical, or otherwise. Chris started watching these, or rather listened to these, in 2016, in an attempt to speed up his gender transition. This culminated in Chris slicing his taint open because he believed that watching or listening to these videos caused a vagina to grow inside him. Despite risking his health from doing so, he continued to follow them. This time in an attempt to develop psychic powers. Of all the videos he's watched, only the ass fattening one has truly worked, and not through its own means. Way to go, Chris. Numerology. Chris has seemed to develop a fixation towards numerology, which became especially prevalent in several jail letters. Chris has on several occasions written the penultimate digit in the year 2022 backwards, so that the 2s resemble a heart. Okay, I suppose that's just like a fun little quirk, I suppose. I will admit I do have a little bit of like a fascination with numbers, but It's not probably not for the same reasons Chris does. They probably would have, if I applied for Number Wang back in 2006, I pretty much would have won every single show. 2022, that's Number Wang. Mathematics. I excelled in Math 2 for the love of God. Mathematics, math or maths for short, is the study of quantity, numbers and space. As with many autistics, Chris displays a fascination with numbers, but despite his claimed honor roll status, he has a weak grasp on the subject. There are countless examples of his mathematical errors, including basic arithmetical errors, as well as quantity, measurement, weight, and time. Chris has stated on at least one occasion that his math education goes all the way to college trigonometry, which shows that at some point he's also learned at least some college-level algebra and geometry, as they are both prerequisites to a typical trigonometry course. He has bragged to Julie about how he's a pretty good math genius. He claimed he received A's in his math classes. However, he hasn't used his supposed talent to his advantage by getting a job in a technical field. On this Wikipedia page, he cited his mathematical talent as proof he should have received an award at graduation. In Mumble Chat number 2, he said he got into a car crash while doing math in his head. Well, to be honest, I think we could all argue that it was all Chris's own fault, because if you're not 100% focused on what you're doing while driving, you shouldn't be behind the wheel. Simple as that. Arithmetic. Quickville's currency is made up of C quarters and W quarters. According to the Sonichu canon, 10 C quarters make up a single W quarter, which makes no sense. A quarter is 1/4 of its respective unit. When Clark told Chris he was $2 short... Oh god, I hate this story so much. When Chris told me he was $2 short of affording his junk food, he was left dumbfounded as to what he should do. Another customer in line gave Chris $2 to make up the deficit, and instead of handing it over to the clerk to pay off his debt, Chris simply took that money, the food, and left the store over everyone's protests. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, that was a real thing that happened. According to Chris, if he lived in Equestria, he'd be 1,050 years old, because 1 year in Equestria is equal to 30 Earth years, while Nightstar is 19 years old in human years, but 570 in pony years. Because Chris has this fixation for his birth date, he decided to give her the birth date 27th or 24th of February 1982, which is apparently pony year 967. Only checking after he's made his statement, Chris did the math to confirm this. In a later Facebook post, Chris stated that 30 out of 365.25 Earth days is equal to 11 Earth days for each birthday. In reality, 30 divided by 365.25 is approximately 8 hundredths. Even more pathetic is how he wrote the quotient as divided 30 by 365 instead of the other way around, and still got it wrong, as 365.25 divided by 30 is equal to 12.175, which cannot be rounded down to 11. In his flawed math, though, he had found that her actual birth date in pony years should be the 19th of February 1939. For those who care. I suppose. I could almost sum up this entire thing by saying that, to those who care, I suppose. In Sonichu issue 10, the 4centgarbage.com tower collapses, with 1,500 people in it. According to Chris, 500 were perfectly unharmed, 250 were too drunk to escape on their own, 125 of these drunk trolls managed to get out alive with help of the sober trolls, while 125 of the drunk trolls were hurt, injured or killed. 125 sober trolls were hurt, injured or killed, 250 were injured, 150s were safe but hurt, and 100 were killed. Not only are we left in the dark about what happened to the 125 drunk troll casualties, but this total also only accounts for 1,375 people. Maybe the 125 just decided not to turn up for work that day or something, I don't know. Estimation and measurement. When exercising by lifting 2 boxes of 12-pack lemonade, he estimated that 4.26 litres of lemonade he was lifting weighed about 50 pounds, when in fact it weighed less than 10. In the chair lifting video, Chris claimed the chair he was lifting weighed a grand number of pounds, and owing to the actual Chris's posture and his technique, it probably would have crushed Chris's spine if it was any more pounds heavier, owing to how he was carrying it. Chris repeatedly claims to have D-cup breasts in his breast massage video. Chris measures his chest and underbust as 44 and 40 inches respectively, and says that they make him a D-cup. In reality, he is a B-cup. Also, the conventional method for breast measurement does not work for trans women, mainly because of chest girth, so Chris is actually closer to an A-cup. Yeah. In the infamous father call, Chris seemed to believe a doghouse made of plastic and wood weighed 5 to 10 tons, and was heavier than any tombstone, which tend to weigh an average of 80 pounds. Now, to be fair, you could say weighed more than any tombstone was meant to be metaphorical, but apparently the wiki seems to think he was being literal, but we'll let him off, I suppose. Essentially, Chris believes that plastic and wood would weigh more than solid stone. I'm not entirely sure if I agree. That was like if Chris was just trying to make a metaphor with that, but it's a bit difficult to determine with Chris, so you know what I mean? After walking 8 miles to and from the post office, Chris vastly underestimated the entire journey to have only been around 2 miles. Yes, well, this could just be attributed to the fact that Chris just, lied to people, as Chris is wont to do. Chris has tried to describe a number of everyday things like love and respect using all kinds of scales and numbers. His most famous example, the heart level, measures his emotional state. Another example, the scale of respect, is meant to be used to measure Chris's respect for certain individuals. In one of Chris's early maps of Quickville, the dimensions of its sectors/divisions are clearly out of scale. Even with Chris's reassurance that his CAD skills are at play, it's pretty easy for even a child to point out the errors in his judgment. I mean, again, we could take a look at this just to give a short little example. Let me put there we go. This is a map locating their house in the city of Relations, which apparently this is meant to... Is meant to equate to a quarter of a mile, or is it this space? Chris probably should have just... I don't know. So, okay, he measures it, he does it like this, but again, you can see these are obviously like... This is like all over the place. So is the city here and the 10 miles diameter, but what is it? I mean, this is meant to be like subdivisional areas, but what is this meant to be? Is it meant to be on this side of the line, or is it just meant to be here? So did Chris ever like look at a map before? I mean, we know he probably fell asleep during science classes, but did Chris ever do like geography classes? Listen, I studied geography for 3 years, from the age of 12 till the end of my year at 14. And even I could probably have told you that, again, just pick up a map and just, come on, you got to look at this a little bit better. I've known people from school who went on to study geography full time, and you got to be kidding me. Is this the best that Chris could come up with? Shame on you, Chris, because all people who study geography the worldwide are just like bashing their heads against the wall for this. There we go. And apparently Chris claimed he used his CAD degree for this. In Sonichu Issue 1, Black Sonichu is supposed to spin dash at 200 rotations per minute, which is supposed to mean that he does it at high speeds. This actually roughly translates to 3 per second. Yeah, and it's... If I think realistically, I think Chris wanted to be something more closer to roughly about 20,000 rotations per minute. That would be slightly more believable, considering what the weight, the size, and everything to convey the idea that Black Sonichu is capable of doing what he can do. Chris claims that that his calls from Central Virginia Regional Jail are limited to 10 minutes. Recordings of full calls, however, show that the actual limit is 15 minutes. Whether or not Chris was a very special exception, I have no idea. Algebra. Planet Dolan artist Viv Homeless made a post joking about how butts are greater than water, written as butts greater than water, to which Chris misunderstood as taking the greater than symbol, meaning that one, to mean less than or the other one. Water is more important than butts. Considering the post was made by a porn artist, and one which Chris follows no less, it is more than shocking to see that he couldn't have made this connection. 2 days later, after the post was made, Chris made another response to 2D animator Spinal Palm, in which he says that salted butter is better than unsalted butter, written as salted butter is, less than unsalted butter. This time around, Chris actually understood the underlying message and agreed with Spinal Palm about the topic. Great. Meaning that he must figure out the meaning of the greater than symbol after several other users corrected him. Geometry. In one of his tirades towards the Xbox, Chris said that the angle of half a circle is 120, then revised his claim to 130. And still got it wrong. It's 180. Number systems. Chris reports of how much Cherokee blood he has is being inconsistent. When he emailed Jackie, he stated he was 1/16th Cherokee, but he later told Regina that he was 1/32 Cherokee. Finally, when talking to Emily, he claimed Bob was at least 1/4 Cherokee, which would make of Chris at least 1/8 Cherokee, not 1/16th or 1/32, because who cares at that point, really? To avoid assigning an unlucky number to his Nightstar comic, Chris decided to number the comic as Sonichu 12-9 using an M- in place of a decimal point. This could make sense if it is referred to the 9th part of an issue, but Chris clearly intends it to be a fictional amount of almost 13. Because Chris is a friggin' idiot, I suppose. And finally, statistics and probability. Chris coined the term infinitely high boyfriend factor, the probability that a woman he is trying to latch onto isn't single, in which he claims that he doesn't hate only 1/4 billionth of all males. Well, points for consistency, I suppose, but again, points are for irrationale, because we know that's what Chris can do, and probably has done for, well over 30 years at this point, but that's just sort of how that is. You can't teach an old dog new tricks or tell him that his methods are complete BS. So that, ladies and gentlemen, was the conclusion to Chris and his relations to the world of science. To the world of science, they'll probably look upon Chris as a subject of great mystery as to how he could come to make such decisions as he could, something that would even trump psychologists the world over, as well as many Christorians from previous experience from like Sachumo and Gino Samuel, even including Gibby as well, and years to come to probably myself, Smokey MC, and plenty of other Christorians who were blessed with the fortune of not finding out who this man is, and what he has become. So, there's that. So, with all that being said and done, ladies and gentlemen, I hope all of you have managed to learn something a bit more useful than anything that Chris could come up with, and I look forward to seeing all of you guys again in the next video. Take care, and bye-bye for now. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and I welcome all of you back to another Chris Chan and Quickie reading. So, here we are, ladies and gentlemen. We are very, very slowly now approaching the end game to all of this, but this is far from the end when we're talking about Chris, so don't worry. Have I got plenty of things in store for you coming up. So, let's continue with Chris and the television. So, I don't even know, I think I must have, screwed up. Okay, so it's not that. Display capture. Okay, display capture might look something like this. There we go. And oh, there we go. Oh, that's nice. Actually, just there we go. Okay, so perfect. I watch too much fucking television. Chris being surprisingly true and honest. Oh, and by the way, this is, in case you're wondering what this is that somebody decided they're actually going to draw, Sonichu characters based on Family Guy, and to be completely fair, these aren't half bad, actually, for what they are. All right down to the way they designed Chris and in the kitchen, Meg. Oh, dear. Television is a widely used telecommunication medium for transmitting and receiving moving images. It is a staple in almost all North American homes, as well as many other homes throughout the world. It's also one of the favourite pastimes of our mutual friend, Indeed. When not socializing, recycling, playing video games, or ranting about blue arms, Indeed, it's a fairly safe bet Chris is sitting down watching TV, lots and lots of TV. Chris gets most of his information concerning the outside world through the television, among other entertainment media. This leads to blatantly ripping off concepts and characters from whatever he watches. Interpolation of media. Chris is prone to interpreting various forms of media in his own strange way. During his attempt to put on his own ads on the Wikipedia, he claimed the award-winning film Avatar was meant to promote the eradication of homosexuality. I'm not entirely sure where Chris got that from, but it was also rather than the tolerance of other cultures. How he contrived this idea is a complete mystery. Exactly, I don't understand that. Not only does homosexuality not feature in the film in any way, but the message of the film that it's entirely wrong to exterminate anything, his view of homosexuals destroying the future, incidentally, emerged from an episode of South Park called Goobacks, which was a satire of the controversy of illegal immigration. In the episode, a group of rednecks who had lost their jobs to illegal immigrants from the future decided that the best way to get their jobs back was to destroy the future by making everyone gay so there wouldn't be anybody in the future. Why Chris thought this was something that was from Avatar, I'm not entirely sure. Chris, however, took everything at face value, because he's Chris, and interpreted the episode as a scare film on par with Red Dawn. In a similar vein, Chris is convinced Family Guy is anti-gay Republican propaganda, owing to his failure to interpret that the show is parodying Republicans, and that the show's creator, Seth MacFarlane, is famously a supporter of gay rights. Interestingly enough, Chris does not have this same misconception when it comes to live action media. He's explicitly stated that Seinfeld characters aren't real and justified his like of the Saw series by saying that the violence is all made up. Apart from sometimes in Chris's mind, because something of a very strange back and forth Chris has done of this is that Chris, for some reason, Chris is under the impression that sometimes the media is... Well, he claims that at sometimes it's not real, and sometimes he claims that it is. And I don't particularly understand what Chris is absolutely getting when he thinks that some media is like real and some isn't. I think the logic comes from the fact that Chris thinks his own characters are real or something like that, or whether or not, and this is possibly the other thought I had while making this, is whether or not it's just the characters Chris likes are dramatized in this fashion, I suppose. As shown above, Chris rarely understands any moral dispensed by media, generally wildly misinterpreting them and then citing them as justification for his ridiculous and bigoted behavior. For example, while attempting to justify his attempt to pretend to be Liquid Chris in an attempt to steal his girlfriend, he claimed that he was wrong, but for the right reasons. This comes from another South Park episode, Best Friends Forever, where, after a satire of the Terry Schiavo controversy, it is stated that Cartman was right, but for the wrong reasons. In context, it meant that his goal of shutting down the vegetative Kenny's life support was the right thing to do for reasons involving the fate of the universe that are too complex to explain here. But his motivation was completely off mark. He only did it because he knew that Kenny's death would cause him to inherit his PSP. Meanwhile, Stan and Kyle were wrong, but for the right reasons, as they wanted to keep Kenny alive in a perpetual vegetative state, even though they should just let him die. I should explain right now that I don't watch South Park, so this is like, I could sort of gather what they're going for, but maybe we should just say this is just the sort of example of the sort of thing Chris follows because, well, he probably knows way more about South Park and Family Guy than probably I will ever know. Chris seems to have interpreted this as if you do a bunch of bad things, like pretending to be someone else in order to steal their girlfriend, you are completely justified in doing so if your dishonest actions lead to a positive outcome. This suggests the idea of Chris being in a relationship is in any way beneficial to anyone else except Chris. Like proving that you are the true and honest Christian Weston Chandler and getting laid. The dimensional merge. Taste in TV. Chris is a fan of South Park and almost all of Seth MacFarlane's creations, Family Guy, American Dad, and The Cleveland Show. He bought tons of their episodes via the PlayStation Network for a sizable amount of money. Adult Swim is another big favourite of our autistic hero, and he even entered one of their contests and raged when he didn't win. I mean, Chris even went out of his way to just straight up say he was going to, throw away the cure for autism for a PlayStation 3. I mean, that doesn't even sound the thing that would be like even parodic for the sake of Adult Swim. That sounds like something that somebody would genuinely say. Oh wait, I forgot Chris did say it, so makes sense there. And he even entered he recently got into F is for Family, a Netflix original created by Bill Burr. Anime is another area where Chris's choices are very transparent. Among some of his favourites over the years include Shuffle, essentially a tale of an unlikable guy suddenly being accosted by several obedient and attractive females, Gunslinger Girl, essentially a slightly unnerving bit of a soft homoeroticism, and Excel Saga. While generally regarded favourable, is chock full of in-jokes and parody things that Chris can't understand but is eager to copy. Certain bizarre choices, however, do stick out. However, Monty Python's Flying Circus has been brought up or referenced several times, along with comedian Red Skelton, and I Love Lucy. The former feature's absurdity probably piqued Chris's interest, while the final two are probably an offshoot of his decrepit parents. Sad but true. Chris is a fan of movie musicals, and that his top three are On the Town, Singing in the Rain, and Meet Me in St. Louis. In the same conversation, he described Mary Poppins, another movie musical, as his favourite film. Chris seems to also have watched a fair bit of Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon in the late 90s and early 2000s, making references to Cousin Skeeter, Ed, Edd and Eddy, and the Powerpuff Girls, among others. Many of these shows have gained significant cult followings, but were made for kids much younger than Chris was at the time. Seeing his other interests, though, it's not that surprising that he was watching shows designed for elementary scholars when he was in high school and college. Chris has also shown an occasional preference for some horror films, including the film adaptation of Silent Hill. Really? The movie version of Silent Hill? Why did he like that? And the Saw... I don't know. I've never watched the Silent Hill films. And the Saw series, which, although rarely mentioned by Chris, could be viewed as an inspiration for the events taking place in Sonichu issue 10. Where the Asperpedia 4 were executed via elaborate death traps. Well, elaborate by Chris's standards. If this picture is clear, Chris may be using Hulu or Hulu Plus lately to watch all the shows he can't access on Netflix. Chris also hinted that he might be using Disney Plus, which... Your tax dollars at work, ladies and gentlemen. If you're more than willing to give money to Chris via his live streams or just through AdSense via his YouTube channel, then that might be the case. Mods Chris uploaded to Mod Nation Races indicate he's a fan of Drawn Together, for obvious reasons. Yeah, does anybody remember Drawn Together? I mean, people may remember Drawn Together as the first ever animated reality show, but unlike Total Drama Island, was conceivably worse for its perpetual usage of gross out and humor that just sort of was very one-dimensional and rather shallow. There was no sophistication in that show whatsoever. He copied a scene from Beavis and Butthead in an issue of Sonichu. Okay. Can you, like, come up with better ideas? You see, I could do jokes like that too. Netflix. Chris has used Netflix to satisfy his watching needs instantaneously, enabling him to reach a near comatose state of mental saturation. Put in more practical terms, he spent more than 6 hours watching Keeping Up Appearances and South Park in a single day. Twice in terms of averages. Chris watches roughly 3 hours of television a day, at least for the week viewed. I mean, how can you even... I don't even remember the last time I ever, like, even watched television for, like, 3 hours at a stretch. You would have to go somewhere nearly maybe 16 years ago for that sort of thing to happen. Well, for me at any rate. I'm probably not even then. The huge selection and instant watch feature, combined with Chris's need to whack, has led to some interesting choices in film. To date, he has rented Maniac Nurses Find Ecstasy, Story of O, Virgin, and many more titles with sexual names and or posters. Considering Netflix doesn't deal in porn, he's wasting his time. Other than these porno hunts and impulse rentals. Chris is pretty much interested in only 2 types of programs. Adult cartoons, British sitcoms and comedy, displaying a remarkably narrow range of interests. I mean, I could go over the very long list of, like, British dramas that Chris might have been interested in, from The Syndicate, Happy Valley, The Fall, Spooks, In the Thick of It. Oh, but God, what else? What else as well? Line of Duty. I think just if Chris had ever had the courtesy to even look into any of these, or even those weekly serials that ITV pumped out for the last year and a half. And for those who live in the UK, you may possibly be aware of these sorts of things as well. But there's no shortage, or even Industry, which is it's extraordinarily captivating, confusing at times a little bit, but Industry is definitely a big recommendation. Even though I'm only like 2 episodes into its second series, it's absolutely worth the watch. And then, of course, when it comes to comedies, like we don't make mention of things like Keeping Up Appearances and Monty Python, but let's think about other things like Brass Eye, The Day to Day, Father Ted, The IT Crowd, Black Books. Peep Show, that Mitchell and Webb look, The Armstrong and Miller Show. Are you really trying to suggest that there's like no other comedies Chris has ever thought to check out? Even the first series of Mrs. Brown's Boys are absolutely worth it. I know a lot of people aren't particularly big fans of the Mrs. Brown's Boys. Even the first 3 series is a little bit hit or miss for some people, but I watched it and actually I thought it was really, really funny. I didn't really watch much of it after that, but then it's the same. The only movie that really stands out is his selections in Twilight. Maybe the only thing I could suggest about Twilight is maybe that Chris had the idea to create a fan fiction and then turn it into an offshoot and then into an infamous bestseller, into an equally as infamous film franchise. Netflix has also allowed him easier access to the cartoons of his childhood, like Transformers and Sonic being the most prominent. The apparent binge of Transformers-related television may have been in the inspiration behind Sonichu Issue 9. Beginning in the second half of the 2010s, Netflix also began investing in anime for original content. Of all things, Chris spent a single day in early July 2020 binge-watching Brand New Animal, merely stating on his social media it's a very good anime. Given that it's a flashy, action-packed anime consisting of humanoid animals, overpowered protagonists, moralizing lectures, a villainous conspiracy, and the heroine's blood used for a vaccine to cure the populace, many of which should sound familiar to anyone on this wiki, that Chris would find it enjoyable is unsurprising. So, that's really all there is to say, and I suppose the way we could actually, like, close this out is by checking out the Chris Chan show. So, Here it is, I suppose. I had no other way of looking into this. 2010, this was. God damn. Did it get renewed for a second series?
This message is to Mr. Mao of the goddamn studio. Your ad right now. What you have up there on my Wikipedia, that's just wrong. You're imitating Jack Thaddeus now, and I do not appreciate it. Either you remove your ads altogether, or I will have your head on it. I've already had...
Okay, laughing track, that's it, I'm done already. Okay, you know what? I'm just gonna, call it snobbish, ladies and gentlemen, call it what you will, but there's absolutely no way I'm actually going to even get into shows with, laughing tracks. At least not American ones, at any rate. So, the only thing I want to say right now, ladies and gentlemen, is that this is probably one of the most, maybe more malleable wiki articles we've done so far, because on one hand, I'm willing to say that it's not so much that Chris's tastes are one-sided and they're just kind of poor, because that's not particularly a very fair sentiment. He knows what he likes and he will stick to it. While occasionally he wants to branch out and try new things, and that's absolutely fine. There's nothing really wrong with that. But one thing you could automatically suggest to this, ladies and gentlemen, is that the problem is that the media he consumes, he only ever puts into his comics if there were just things he could just straight up steal, from characters to plots to, well, with the thing with Brand New Animal, that might be the only exception to the rule where maybe art is imitating life, or life imitating art, or something like that. I'm not entirely sure. But again, I can't really be too mean to Chris about this, not because I think my tastes are different or better. Well, they're certainly different. Listen, I like Monty Python and all that, but there are plenty of other comedies out there as well, and I like horror films as well, but there are lots of other ones outside of the Saw franchise. And well, what else can I say? I think I don't really feel like I've got anything else to say, so that's just that. So I hope that every one of you have enjoyed this article on Chris and television. It's just kind of a little bit what this was. It's just not really too much else to say, really, apart from he watches some anime and watches Monty Python and then watches a lot of Seth MacFarlane material. And with all that being said and done, I hope to see all of you guys again in the next video. Take care, and bye-bye for now. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, we come to Chris's... When it comes to religion, ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to faith or losing your religion, look no further than the incredibly intoxicating, incredibly disastrous, incredibly unhealthy, incredibly obsessive, incredibly economically bankruptcy, ridiculously, you absolute moron, you thick, worthless thing when it comes to Chris's relationship with video games. So, well, what else can I say, ladies and gentlemen? But, well, let's finish this. And Christian's father says it only takes a few hours for him to master an electronic game, and then move on to another. I can't master any of them. And a TV anchor woman on a younger Chris winning the Sonic the Hedgehog Watch and Win sweepstakes. I know we've covered that before, but I want to emphasize again, one of the games that Chris wanted to get was Sonic, I think it was Sonic Dash, or Sonic or Sonic Spinball Dash, or whatever. It was basically Sonic the Hedgehog if it was a pinball platformer. It literally cost $50 back in, what was it, 1990 or something like that, or 91? No, it must have been at least, probably maybe 92 or something like that. Chris would have been at least 10 years old by that point. In case of cursory glance that this wiki did not tell you, Chris likes video games a lot. In fact, Chris definitely has spent more time on video games than any other activity or pursuit, including his love quest. He has said he spends between 2 and 4 hours a day playing games, circa 2010 is when he said this, and that figure is likely higher than what he admits to. Without delving deeply into armchair psychiatry, it is not hard to see why video games hold so much appeal to Chris. His brain is wired to operate according to absolute values and rigidly defined processes. This is one of the reasons he has so much difficulty in the real world. The rules keep changing on him. If he figures out the rules in the first place, in the artificial world of video games, the challenges are the kind that his inflexible mind is able to comprehend and surmount. There, the rules never change, and all he has to do is follow them. Reality isn't quite as simple as Chris likes to imagine it to being, which is why he spends as little time out there as possible. And will also consequently do things like this. The early years. Well, I guess you could say it gives new meaning to the phrase, the red ring of death. Hey? No? Just me then. Chris has been an avid gamer since a very young age. He first played video games on a Commodore 64 home computer system, before he was 8 years old. He had a Game Boy and a Nintendo Entertainment System, and he acquired more consoles and games throughout the 90s. According to the Solitude Chronicles, he has been a fan of Sonic the Hedgehog since the character's 91 debut for the Sega Genesis. His game collection really took off in 93, when he won his famous shopping spree. Okay, so he was 11 years old. Okay. In the Sonic the Hedgehog Watch and Win sweepstakes, and added $1,000 worth of Sega games and hardware to his hoard. Chris's game collection. Which, again, there's going to be like a larger article on that if you were interested. Although the last completely reliable account of his collection dates back to all the way in January 2009, Chris owns, conservatively, nearly 850 different game titles across 20 different platforms. He sold off roughly 100 games in various trips to GameStop and local pawn shops during the late summer and early fall of 2010, but this hardly depletes the reserves at all. He also maintained an account with the mail-order rental service GameFly until August 2010. Sony consoles dominate Chris's collection. Counting the games he has downloaded through the PlayStation Network, nearly half of his games belong to the PlayStation family. Nintendo comes next, including more than 100 games for Nintendo's different portable platforms, and Sega bringing up the rear. While he owns every Sega console, short of an 8-bit Master System, and Sonic the Hedgehog is one of his favourite individual franchises, games for Sega collections make up less than 15 to 10% of Chris's collection. Well, assuming that Chris didn't just buy like multiple versions of the same game across different consoles, if that's... Well, it probably wouldn't be ridiculous to do that. Imagine buying things for system... well, then again, this is the sort of thing that Chris did, but we'll get into that. Chris's violent hatred of the Xbox is well known, but he likely owns, or at one point owned, an original Xbox console. However, it is not known how much time he has spent on Xbox games. His eBay account shows that he tried to sell off a handful of Xbox games in the summer of 2008. The summer of his eBay sales also indicates that, in addition to owning at least one of every machine he owns games for, he has gone through at least 3 or 4 of Sony's original PlayStation consoles over the year. Wait, what the fuck was he doing if he was like... Hang on, let me see if I understand that properly. He has gone through at least 3 or 4 of Sony's original PlayStation... So... What did Chris do? Did he damage them? Did he, like, destroy them? What are you talking... Well, they could have been, like, I don't know, maybe wrecked in the house fire, but why on earth would you just own 2... I mean, I've still got my PlayStation 2 that I've had for 20 years. I don't really think it, like, plays many games on it nowadays and stuff like that, but it still works. So... I'm very confused. But then again, since a lot of the games you could actually just straight up buy, like on the PS4 or PS5 through the network store, it might not be too much of an issue. There are harder things to get your head around, I suppose. It is possible that he's had to replace a few of his infamously fragile apparatuses for overuse, but this could be an indication that he bought the systems and games in bundles. It is virtually impossible to gauge exactly how much money has been shoveled into Chris's game collection over the past few decades. Knowledgeable trolls, however, reckon that his physical collection of games and hardware represents around $20,000. His PlayStation Network downloads, meanwhile, can be accurately accounted for free. The bill is close to $3,500, and surely climbing all the while. One of the more grievous examples of Chris's video game-related overspending is his apparent ownership of at least 2 copies of the $80 Street Fighter IX 4's Collector's Edition, as evidenced by the 2 identical exclusive Ryu figurines he later sold on eBay. While it is possible that Chris received the second figure from an outside source or packaging error, his attempt to bribe Blue Spike with a copy of the game, and his habit of wasting money for no particular reason, led credency to the former theory. In January of 2015, it was leaked on the Quickie forums that Chris had spent an absurd amount of money on Nintendo consoles and games, racking up 585 transactions in the last 4.5 years, or 150 payments a year. This list includes useless shovelware, virtual console games, and both versions of a game that he does not even like. Of these, 276 purchases are known to be handheld titles. 8 are known to be video game consoles, buying 4 DSs and DSi consoles. Why you need literally any more than 1 DSi is a very, very good question. I don't understand it. And besides, I remember I could go over like the list of like my collection. It's literally my PS2, my PS4, my DSi, and then I upgraded it. I traded in for the DSi XL in 2010, and then I upgraded that again and got the 3DS XL, and then I got the Nintendo Switch. In fact, yeah, it's literally been 10 years since. I may as well just go get it, actually, for what it's worth. I know, all this talk of video gaming. At one point, ladies and gentlemen, yes, I used to be playing video games very regularly as well, and, well, that's not really me anymore, or at least to a much lesser extent. I have to, like, literally wipe the dust from... Here it is, ladies and gentlemen. This is... basically the case for my 3DS XL, and I only bought my Switch like about 2 years ago, and God Almighty, it's a copy of Soul Silver in here, and it's a copy of 42 All-Time Classics, Bleach: The Blade of Fate, Pokemon Platinum, Mario Kart DS, Brain Training, Pokemon Black. And what was this? It looks like, I think it's like Mario Kart 7, I think. But yeah, look at that, ladies and gentlemen. 3DS XL. I literally got this like a week before I turned 16, and I actually cannot believe the fact that. Wait a minute. Hang on. It's still Look at that. It's. I've literally I don't think I've opened this thing up since. I can't delete it. Yeah, literally. I can't quite remember. I think like I'm trying to remember at the back of my head when the last time I actually bothered actually playing on this thing. I'm thinking like maybe 8.5 years ago. At some point during like late 2015 was the last time I actually remembered using this. So this thing has basically just been alone in my room for like 8+ years, and plus, boy, that is a blaster from the past if ever I've seen one. That's actually quite that's a very nostalgic feeling for me. That just it works like an absolute peach. Anyway, so sorry, where were we? Okay, yes. The grand total cost of all of Chris's listed purchases is $7,460.43, or $1,657.87 a year. Keep in mind that 39% of the purchases Chris has on his account, such as Skylanders figurines, amiibos, and his Wii U Virtual Console purchases, are not yet specified, meaning that their cost is not included in this already insane... I know, right? I mean, if I was to give an estimation, ladies and gentlemen, maybe very, very roughly from the top of my head, all money I've spent on video games over the years for my when I was a kid with my PS2 to my DS games to the PC gamings, to my PS4, to my Switch, it must have only equated maybe nearly 18 years of like playing video games. So maybe possibly £400 or something like that. 400 pounds across 18 years. So let's see, 10, 240. Bear with me. Let's see, calculator. There we go. Let's see, 400 divided by... So about roughly 22.2 recurring pounds a year, which, again, that's not too bad, all things considered, I suppose. Keep in mind that 39% of the purchases Chris has on his account, such as Skylanders figure... Okay, apparently his main attention and fanboyism has shifted from PlayStation back to Nintendo for unknown reasons. This leak also revealed that Chris plays almost every game demo available on the eShop, Nintendo's online downloadable video game store, even if he has no interest in said game. This leak also confirmed he had bought every single Sonic game and primary Pokemon RPG, proving that he is still a major fanboy of both franchises, and also confirmed that he still makes many purchases multiple times over for no apparent reason, such as Wario's Woods. I don't know what Wario's Woods is, but Chris seriously must have one day just thought, you know what, I think I'll get that, just because he could. Chris does not do window shopping. He probably thinks that means you're literally going to buy Windows. Possibly. Gaming preferences. Going on what evidence is available, such as what he has talked about on his websites and YouTube, what his PSN profile shows the most effort put into, and what he decides to construct elaborative fan works around, Chris has fairly childish casual taste in video games, though he puts an inordinate level of effort and time into gaming. He does so playing stuff like Sonic, Pokemon, Animal Crossing, Guitar Hero, and other games geared toward more mainstream and less hardcore audiences. His favourite racing game, Mod Nation Racers, is a straightforward title that allows players to create their own tracks and cars. Little Big Planet earned a rabid following for its level editor, but otherwise it is just another side-scrolling platform game. And Chris hardly strains the level editor to the limits of its potential. Most of his PSN trophy... Hang on, wait a minute. Did Chris never ever played Super Mario Maker, did he? Because I would have thought that's the sort of thing... I mean, I have a copy of like Super Mario Maker 2 and all that, but I'm surprised Chris never thought about, I don't know, just making his own levels just for people to... It's again, one of those things I felt like would have been a slam dunk when it comes to Chris, but... Never mind. Much of his PlayStation Network trophy case is filled out with achievements obtained by playing simple downloadable demo scenes and indie pop productions. Chris has purchased a fair share of M-rated games over the years, such as Family Guy, the video game, Grand Theft Auto, and Call of Duty. which shows that his interest in games is not necessarily limited to the E rating. These games, however, tend to be fairly shallow in terms of gameplay. Brutal Legend isn't remarkably deep as far as gameplay is concerned. While the game is an M-rated title with swearing, decapitations, heavy metal music, and tricky real-time strategy elements, for the most part, the atmosphere is still jolly and humorous enough, and the majority of gameplay consists of exploring the world and having straightforward beat-em-up fights. Some have questioned whether or not Chris's interest in Brutal Legend was because of an affinity for director Tim Schafer's other quirky offbeat games such as Psychonauts and Grim Fandango. While Chris might be drawn to the perceived random access humour of those games, it is more likely that they were too intelligent for him, and thus hold no appeal to his childish mind. Chris's interest in Brutal Legend was most likely due to Jack Black voicing the main character, and possibly his failed attempts to be seen as a connoisseur of music. Though why exactly Chris thought of Brutal Legend when he says he hates heavy metal music, that's a good question that we're probably never going to know the answer to. The games that Chris owns are not necessarily the games that Chris plays, however. His PlayStation Network downloads strongly suggest that he spends money on his gaming hobby more or less out of compulsion. Witness the $65 he spent on downloadable content for Disgaea 3, a game he had only played to 7% completion several months after originally buying all those downloads. It is reasonable to assume that Chris has similar spending habits in real life, a theory bolstered somewhat by his retro game collection and a house full of junk. Chris's collections of games for the Sega CD, Saturn, and a couple of other now-dead consoles are dominated by bargain bin trash, extremely common or poor quality games that are easily bought at low prices. No knowledgeable gamer would ever pay money for Power Factory featuring C+C Music Factory, except maybe as a gag gift. I've never even heard of that. But Chris apparently thought it was worth owning. This habit seems to be picked up from Barbara and continues to this day in the form of eShop shovelware and virtual game console downloads. His collection does a good job of telling us what sort of games Chris does not play though. Outside of the Pokemon series, for instance, he evinces no interest in role-playing games. Most of the non-Pokemon RPGs in his collection, like Suikoden and Final Fantasy VII, are PlayStation Retro releases he impulse bought through the PlayStation Network. Chris buys those up like penny candies. He has even downloaded several digital duplications of PlayStation games which he already owns physical copies for. Even during his short Hyperdimension Neptunia phase in late 2017, he only showed an interest in the anime adaptation of the games and has never shown any indication he has either been interested in or played the games. Which is a bit of a shame, to be honest, because one of the games that... there was a time when I was a fan of the Hyperdimension series as well, and I only really stopped getting interested in it just when... I don't know, I was caught in the middle of so many other things at once, and I had to, prioritize certain things. That's kind of, really when I stopped playing video games as often as I did. It was just because, again, I was graduating from university in a couple of weeks from that point, and I had to focus on, getting myself a job in the real world, which is why I haven't completed Cyber Dimension Neptunia, which is... It's basically something equivalent to a parody of Sword Art Online, which is really funny because you've got literal video game CPUs, which are like the manifestations of consoles, playing actual video games. They even make several tongue-in-cheek jokes about it, about the fact that they're literally just sitting next to each other whilst playing this game. And I only bring Cyber Dimension up because it has a very, very different style of gameplay because it uses Unreal Engine, which for the avid enthusiast is the sort of thing that Fortnite was made with. They both use the same video game engine, and the actual gameplay itself is more akin to something like of World of Warcraft, where you have to select between spells and abilities, and You get they get like a reward system in which you defeat a certain thing or collect items circa the likes of Dark Souls. So there's like several little many different elements that go into these sorts of things, and if you've never played it for yourself, I would recommend it. It's actually quite an interesting experience, to say the least, if you're interested in that sort of thing. Despite being obsessed with Pokemon, he is not a hardcore Nintendo fan as some might suspect. He never seems to show interest in the latest content from Nintendo, and the hardcore Nintendo gamers or games he does own, such as games from the Metroid, The Legend of Zelda, and the Mario franchises, are most likely just collecting dust on his game collection racks. However, a January 2014 leak of a Nintendo employee revealed that Chris had, in fact, returned to his Nintendo roots, buying nearly every single game on the eShop. He owns almost no sports games. In the mailbag, he once noted that sports titles do not really thrill me, although he did not exactly explain why. Though there's reasons to suggest possibly why. I mean, if somebody said to Chris, "Wii Fit," then probably not. With a few exceptions, Chris has no apparent interest in video games marketed towards his own age group, which is, unsurprisingly, hardcore games aimed at adults are games that simply would not interest Chris because of his juvenile mindset. Video games, and anything else for that matter with mature themes, are not two-dimensionally crass and full of random access humour, would probably confuse and bore Chris and make him feel awkward and uncomfortable. Adding to the fact he probably would not be able to get very far in the game, this is supported by the fact that he did not try out BioShock, a first-person shooter with RPG elements, but only for a short time and never touched it again. Most likely, the whole game itself flew right over Chris's head, and he decided to play some Wheel of Fortune instead. However, ever since his sixth declaration that he has left the internet in late 2010, some more high-profile games aimed at adults have appeared on his PlayStation Network trophy list, such as Grand Theft Auto 4 and Fallout New Vegas. Apparently, the Hannah Montana PlayStation 3 game is no longer enough to fill his abundance of free time. And he has taken to playing games he would not normally be doing anything else with his life. While he sometimes gets tagged with the Weeaboo label, Chris does not appear to prefer games made in Japan over any other part of the world. In fact, his favourite games of 2008 to 2009, the period where he has told us the most about what he plays, are pretty evenly divided between Japan, likes of Sonic and Pokemon, the United States, Guitar Hero Brutal Legend, Canada, Mod Nation Races, and Europe, Little Big Planet. He counts a few Japanese Game Boy and Nintendo DS imports in his larger collection, but they are obviously titles he picked up to try and impress/bribe Megan Schroeder. Makes sense. Almost all of them are spin-offs from popular animes, especially Magical Girl series like Sailor Moon and Pretty Cure. When Chris and Megan still got along well together, they were serious players of the arcade version of Soul Calibur 3. There is also an arcade in Chris's plans for the Quickville Shopping Centre. However, given Chris's inclinations to retreat into the comfortable confines of his bedroom, the chances he goes to arcades are slim. And they're still quite popular in some ways, arcades. Probably maybe not as big as they would have liked to have been, but for what they are still out there. Chris the Brave Console Warrior. Chris thinks the perennial console wars between rival manufacturers of game machines are extremely serious affairs, and engages in them with all the bile and fervour of a 10-year-old child soldier in the PlayStation army. On rare occasions, he has almost seemed rational in this respect, saying he just doesn't like or doesn't care much for the Xbox, but most of the time he does not mince words when describing the vile, loathsome and blatantly stupid Hexbox, by comparison. He has waxed poetic when describing the awesomeness of the PS3, most prominently in his PS3 history level for Little Big Planet. According to Lucas, Chris would even express his fury over the Xbox in public while hanging out at the game place. It is hard to tell where Chris's religious devotion to the PlayStation comes from, but to call it religious is not hyperbole. Like his faith in God Jesus, his support for Sony is blind and unthinking, though he can come up with a small justification for his opinions in a pinch. Typically, he brings up the annual fee for online gaming on Xbox Live. That's a pretty good start. Chris shows no sign of having put any serious thought or research into his choice of consoles. His descriptions of the PS3's advantages in places like his Columbus Day 2008 video tend to sound like a collection of marketing buzzwords, as filtered through the mind of a cave-dwelling autist. But anyway, interestingly enough, Chris was not always a blindly devoted fan of Sony. In the Animal Crossing documentary, we see that back in 2003, Chris pledged his allegiance to Nintendo and the GameCube, stating that both the predecessors of the PS3 stank as much as the original Xbox. His feelings changed when he bought a PlayStation 1 at a rummage sale for cheap, intending to resell it elsewhere for profit. But instead, played it and found it was not bad. One would expect this to be a lesson against nonsensical brand loyalty. Oh no, it didn't. But instead, Chris just focused his hatred on Microsoft. Likely prior to this, Chris was a Sega fanatic at Nintendo's expense. If true, then it demonstrates how fickle Chris is regarding devotion. When asked what his thoughts were on the Nintendo Switch, Nintendo's up-and-coming console for 2017, Chris responded in Chris fashion and simply stated he had no thoughts on it due to being preoccupied. Where does it say stress? Okay, well, that makes sense. Yeah, and this also, again, gives a little bit more insight as to why I'm also covering this along with Chris's other religious devotions, because, well, outside of maybe his more vocational points of view, this is certainly one that goes into there. I'll probably cover, like, maybe the main parts of the love quest very shortly after, because I'm thinking more in aspects of, like, devotion it's more plausible to apply this to, so the more the merrier, I say. Unsurprisingly, Chris is ignorant of things he has chosen not to like. The only 360 game he seems to show interest in is Don't Be Nervous Talking to Girls, seen in Sonichu Issue 10, being modified for the PlayStation 3. Was suggested to him by the fans. Though the game is just a crappy dating sim, and though there aren't other 360 exclusive games which would appeal to him, Chris claims that it is the only game worth playing on the 360. He has got to be joking. Even slying mud at the names of consoles is very serious business to Chris. In Lars's call, Chris says he does not like it when people call the PS3 the PlayStation Triple, because that is what trolls call it. Of course, this comes from a man who ceaselessly rants about the Hexbox. Oh, and by the way, yeah, this is him just saying, no thoughts, I have been preoccupied. That's all the time Chris could be bothered to give about an opinion. Chris and online gaming. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Chris, given his antisocial nature, Chris is not fond of online multiplayer games in any genre, be they sports sims, shooters, racing games, or whatever else. Though he owns several games for the PS3 and other consoles that would allow him to play online and interact with other people. His PlayStation Network profile shows that he has put little time into multiplayer games. In 2010 and afterwards, two exceptions to this rule emerged. He did a good deal of online racing in Mod Nation races during the summer of 2010, while early in 2011, Chris began to show an interest in online role-playing game for the first time, DC Universe Online. His fondness for Mod Nation competition eventually passed, but it remains to be seen whether or not he will develop a lasting interest in MMO gaming. I probably don't think so, because outside of the fact that even the subscription fee for something like World of Warcraft, I'm not entirely convinced Chris would just I don't think Chris has shown it. I mean, I've shown interest in it before, but the problem is that it would mean giving money to Blizzard, and I don't, well, Activision Blizzard, and I don't really want to do that, because, listen, I used to play Overwatch, was like the only real big game I played during my time at university, and for reasons I don't exactly have all the time in the world to get into. Outside of the other things that Activision Blizzard does, they will just disappoint you time and time and time again, including to the point of just ruining an entire game just to make more money. Anyone familiar with the disaster of Overwatch 2 will absolutely testify to how Blizzard because they couldn't just stick to a routine or stick to something that would make sense. They just put their time and resources into things, then lied about it, and then released, basically gave us all a worse version of a game that was, to that point, quite readily, received. It may not have been the best game in the world, but Overwatch was absolutely better than average. Dedicated observers of Chris's gaming habits may notice a bit of a paradox developing here. Chris claims to hate the Xbox 360 because Microsoft requires a $50 annual subscription fee for online multiplayer gaming. It is a mystery then why this would wind him up so badly, when he hardly plays any multiplayer games. But such is the nature of Chris. Mailbag correspondents have tried to point the seeming contradiction here, not to mention the weird contrast between Chris's thriftiness as far as Xbox Live is concerned, and the massive amounts of money he willingly wastes on worthless digital trinkets through Nintendo and the PlayStation Network, for all the good it has done, though may seem as well as try to change his opinion on Asperger's syndrome. Recently, Chris has started playing online games on his Switch and PC, playing titles such as Tetris 99 and Payday 2. Payday 2, I mean, I know what that, I think I know what that game is, but I've not heard that for at least nearly 10 years. That's pretty interesting, I suppose. Chris, the trophy whore. While Chris has little evident interest in directly interacting with other humans in online games, he does not seem to enjoy building up a massive trophy case to passively show off his PlayStation Network profile. He has doggedly played through a number of games in order to earn every available achievement, and on occasion he appeals to his fanbase for help in earning trophies. For instance, he begged readers on his Twitter feed to download the Mon Nation levels so that he could pick up one more trophy. Slacker that he is, Chris prefers to put forth as little effort as possible to actually earning his trophies. Presented with a trophy in Little Big Planet 2 that asked him to contribute a custom level to the game's online community. He fulfilled the requirement by uploading an empty level with no work. Are you kidding me? Did he really do that? Listen, I know I've spoke about Chris being lazy many times in the past, but that's quite an overstatement, that, ladies and gentlemen. He literally got a trophy in a video game for doing absolutely nothing whatsoever. When this level was deleted by the community's administrators, he took the non-easiest route possible and uploaded his old levels made with the first Little Big Planet. In an email to Jackie, he expressed great pleasure when the Mon Nation experience system was patched to make certain trophies easier to acquire. At last, somebody who doesn't have a job actually has cause to celebrate, ladies and gentlemen, as opposed to, actually doing something more practical with your time. For God's sake, Chris, do some fucking work. Chris and PC games. Chris has games for personal computers are conspicuously absent from Chris's collection, and is evident from his game-playing habits. The only sign that he has ever owned an online game, to say the least, or PC games, comes from his eBay account. In the summer of 2008. He also owned, which shows off he tried to auction off a collection of a vintage copy of the first Lego of the vintage, a collection of vintage Dungeons and Dragons role-playing games for the PC in the summer of 2008. He also owned a copy of the first Lego Island game for the PC, as well as seen by his possession of the Infomaniac minifigure, which was only obtainable from early copies of the said game. In the fan mail reading video, after a fan sent him a copy of Half-Life 2, Chris explained, "I don't play PC games, I used to, but I don't anymore." He failed to indicate why he gave them up, and he failed to actually sound as though he actually was grateful for the fact that he received something for absolutely nothing. In his first Mumble chat, he claimed to remember Touhou, but later backpedaled and said, "I have never really heard of that." Due to the influence of the Idea guys and him acquiring a decent computer, Chris has picked up PC gaming. He has a Steam profile and has played Payday 2 at least. Chris, the industry insider. Chris gets most of his information about the gaming industry from comparatively mainstream sources. He was an avid reader of Game Informer magazine. As for publications and or other media sources that have since gone defunct, he was also a dedicated reader of Sony's online magazine Core, and recently followed the G4 cable network. Do you guys remember that? And the disaster that was when they tried to bring it back? He apparently even still took the Spike TV Video Game Awards seriously, which puts him about 5 years behind anybody with even a passing interest in the games business. Chris, the game designer. At various times, especially during the Miyamoto saga, but going as far back as the late 90s, when he had a prophetic dream of a Sonic game for the Game Boy, Chris has imagined that he could launch himself into a career as a game designer. It is telling, however, that nearly all of his ideas for potential video game projects simply involve swapping Sonichu or other Chris-spawned characters into an existing game concept. Pokemon Lightning version is a Pokemon RPG with Sonichu in it. Sonichu Adventure is Sonic Adventure with Sonichu in it. John's Custom Gundam, Sisterly Rescue, is Gundam. Journey to Jabora with Mega. The closest he has gotten to coming up with something like an original idea is Christian Weston Chandler's Adult Chronicles, and it is not actually known what the game is supposed to amount to, beyond what Chris drew on the cover, and occasionally haphazard mentions. It is entirely possible, however, that the answer is unknown to Chris himself. Nevertheless, Chris sincerely believes that his characters and game ideas are ready for commercial success. He once rejected an email from the mailbag that brought up the notion of a not-for-profit fan-made Sonichu game and brushed off similar suggestions in his first IRC fan chat in the video about dispelling rumors of an official Sonichu game. He scoffed at the idea of his game's ideas being made with 2D graphics. Why this is, or maybe if it was for like any specific game Chris had in mind, is worth asking. But again, it's one of those things where Chris just straight up dismayed the idea of things that people did absolutely for free and in their own time for him. Modding and customization. One of the great ironies of Chris's existence is that he loves to create and share his creations. So far, so good. However, even though he possesses almost no genuine innate creativity, he tends to gravitate towards, or strongly towards, I should say, video games that allow him to create his own content and share it online. Since console games are often not modifiable, while PC games, the modding trends to demand more technical skill than he possesses. For example, there's an entire YouTube channel that is dedicated to people modding a version of Elden Ring so that they can have characters like Slave Knight Gale, the Orphan of Kos, and things again like the Dragon Slayer armor, all assets taken from different From Software games to fight the bosses of Elden Ring. It's worth noting, well, again, Chris is not I don't think he's particularly into Elden Ring himself, but that could be, that's just an example to say there. Chris has only been able to show off his creativity in this field so much. That said, the PS3 games Little Big Planet and Mod Nation Races exerted a powerful grip on him with their customization capabilities. Chris made a ton of levels in Little Big Planet, dropping out of sight for the better part of a month when he first acquired the retail version of the game. Likewise, he has made levels, characters and custom cars for Mod Nation Racers, and it resulted in a similar disappearance during the summer of 2010. His output has not shown too much actual competence, but it is not for lack of time and effort spent. Even in games that offer only light customization features, Chris makes a point of personalizing his experience as much as possible. He spent considerable time on a Guitar Hero band, up to drawing disturbing pictures of his virtual bandmates. The amount of time he spent on tweaking his Animal Crossing villages is simply colossal. According to the Regina emails, Chris made a similarly big deal about F-Zero GX and Jet Set Radio, even though both games limit their customization options to things like swapping around car parts or personalizing small decals. Likewise, as the gallery below displays, Chris enjoys customizing his game's hardware. He has splattered Sonichu artwork all over his GameCube, a Nintendo DS, a couple of Game Boy Advances, a PSP, his now deceased original PS3, and possibly other consoles and handhelds. One of his Pokewalkers also appears to have received the Sonichu treatment, being repainted in blue and yellow. Chris became interested in Sonic the Hedgehog fan game and modding Project Sonic World in late 2020. After joining its Discord group, he requested creators make based on Sonichu and his female obsession at the time, Project SNT. In December of that year, Chris found a Sonichu mod and wished to add his voice acting into it. While he did not want to get into contact with the original creator and ask if he could add it to the mod, Chris opted going without permission and downloaded the mod, replaced the original voice clips with his own, and reposted it. Because of the original mod's appropriation, Chris was banned from the mod hosting website Game Banana. He was banned from the Sonic World Discord group for not long after due to his passive-aggressive yet megalomaniacal confrontation with the Sonichu mod's creator. Nothing new or out of the ordinary for Chris, but it's proof that, again, if Chris does not get his way immediately for all things, he will get mad. Chris's perception of video game technology. Chris obviously has no idea about how video games or video game consoles work. For example, as seen in a panel of Sonichu issue 10, he seems to think that games are interchangeable and can work on any console. Do not buy or download illegal copies of Little Big Planet on Wii or Xbox 360. It is punishable by law. Do you mind if Chris stops shouting at us? I'm not interested. I'm just sitting here just trying to enjoy my time. What? Calm down, Chris. What the hell? Even though he could easily check and see that he cannot play his copy of Little Big Planet on his Wii, although he is either too lazy or is afraid of having his house raided by jerk-ops. Neither is he aware of the technology's current capabilities. As stated in the survey of Chris in Reality, he once suggested that Nintendo should create a Pokeball peripheral which could display holographs, which can only be seen in science fiction. Currently. Decline of gaming passion. Chris's passion for gaming seems to have relatively subsided by the late 2010s. By 2020, it had been months since he touched his PlayStation 4 and has not shown much interest in the new PlayStation's first and third-party titles. A look at his then recent tweets about abandoned wish list suggested he was busy binging TV shows and movies. However, Chris continued to regularly play Tetris 99 on the Nintendo Switch from 2019 up until his arrest in 2021. On the 11th of September 2020, during Chris's phase of role-playing as Sonichu, Chris was asked the following question in Discord Q&A 6. Dear Christine, are you getting any of the next-gen consoles? If so, what games are you excited for? Chris responded, taking you mean the new PS5 or Xbox S generation of consoles, Mama had not really given that much thought, and I haven't as much either, considering we will be in the new timeline, free of this pandemic and all of that. During the jail saga. During Chris's time behind bars, for perhaps the first time in his life, he was deprived of any ability to access his game collection. The various letters he sent to assorted acquaintances over the course of his confinement made little mention of his electronic hoard, and the status of his collection is itself unknown. While Chris, having been away from his home for the better part of 2 years at time of writing, it's been some time since he's been released, and he has a Switch with him. We're not entirely sure if this is the same Nintendo Switch, although many would suggest it was a new Switch, but then why exactly would his consoles and games be taken away by the police for possession and stuff like that it's something I don't know. It's something that would have to go into more detail when it comes to the actual legalities of Chris's case. With Chris having been away from his home for the better part of 2 years, and reports that items belonging to him were thrown out of the house, there is every likelihood that the games and consoles he cherished so dearly and intended to pass on to his children of his own have simply been sold off, given away, or tossed in a landfill. However, in an apparent bid to make the most of his newly found freedom after his release in March 2023, he was swift to visit a local Walmart and purchase another Nintendo Switch, according to an eyewitness account. This account was swiftly corroborated by others who posted images of Chris's online activity, images that paint an unsurprising picture. Since his new acquisition, he has wasted little time catching up on the games he has missed. Pokemon is front and center, as screenshots of him playing playtime hours and tweets he has posted suggested he has purchased at least 4 games within that franchise since leaving jail, including seemingly both Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. More curiously, his PSN profile was spotted at being active online after years of silence in August 2023, showing that he was dabbing in with the demo version of Street Fighter VI on a PlayStation 5, despite stating on a November 2023 livestream that he does not yet own a PlayStation 5. This nevertheless proves that despite everything, Chris is more than willing to do what he always does, pony up hundreds of support of his passions, even in the face of an extremely uncertain future. Old habits always die hard, at least for Chris. And going a little bit further into this, we see there's things like a GameCube skin and a Game Boy Advance skin, and even like a Game Boy skin as well. Not to mention he even did a DS skin as well. And these are things that have actually worked, so I can't exactly say it's actually quite impressive for Chris's capabilities. Then he also has a PlayStation Portable skin, and like several things revolving around like a Sonichu mod for the first Sonic the Hedgehog game, pictures of Chris's PlayStation Network account, and well, that's just about all we need to know at the moment. And for the time being, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes Chris's tales and his relationships with video games. Basically, the one cult or sect, if you will, that Chris never really seems to ever consider shying away from, because it is just about the only thing he will hold dear and cherish, well, among many other things. And as we see right now, ladies and gentlemen, speaking of cherish, is that, look at that. Now, technically, there are like only a few more things we have to cover, like brand loyalty, and apparently, have some of these been updated since we last did them? Because all of them are now blue, when previously almost all of these were like purple. But anyway, so we have brand loyalty left to do. We also have, well, sports is something that's new, so that should be pretty interesting, especially as the Olympics are coming up. English, language, music, Spanish, and writing. So there's roughly about 5 more of these to go over. So watch this space, ladies and gentlemen, because we're not quite finished with Chris yet, and there's still a lot of things revolving around Chris's health that we have to cover, and I hope every single one of you has enjoyed this reading through Chris's foray into video games, and I cannot wait to see all of you guys again in the next video. Take care, and bye-bye for now.